let us know in the chat if we are here. If we are live and alive, let us know. Exciting times all around, obviously.
Of course. It looks live on my side, so...
Okay. I think we're good then. Let's just see if people start giving us some positive feedback. Lovely to see.
Maybe just give us like a little... We can see...
Oh,
there we go.
there we go.
We're live.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to see all the familiar faces. Hi to Jessica, to Erin, to Maxisto, to Fred, Kansu, to Lizzie, to Lynn, to Halbrand's Pouch, and to Marco. Well, hello, everyone who's here already. You'll, of course, be excited to see that it's not just my ugly face here today. I am once again joined by the lovely Anna, who bailed last week. So first of all, Anna, I usually say, how are you? Welcome to the show. But would you first like to make an apology to all the viewers for not being here last week?
I'm sorry, guys. I actually learnt my lesson because I did have a very good reason for not coming last week, but I kind of took a moment to come onto the chat while Harry was doing the live stream by himself, and I had like a lot of FOMO. I was like, oh, I kind of miss being on there and yapping with you. But I hope Harry kept you guys entertained all by himself.
Well, I thought I did, but admittedly, there were a lot of people messaging saying, where's Anna? When's Anna going to come on? Why is it just you? So overall, I think the feedback was mixed.
And we've got some good feedback from Jessica, who says, Anna looks so unpixelated today and we can hear her. That's
I
like a
mean,
miracle.
that is a miracle. I
And
have
I
no
have
idea.
Rent's pouch.
I have no idea why my stream gets so pixelated. It's probably because I'm the one doing all the hosting and the recording. So mine is probably
Yeah, all the
always going to
hard
look
work.
pixelated. Exactly. All the hard work. Well, Anna just shows up, talks a little bit. But yeah, so no, I'm glad to see so many familiar faces back and more people I recognize in the chat. To Benjamin, to Susie. Míriel's Eagle, that's a new one. I wasn't even familiar with that member of the Unhinged. New one every week. Right, so obviously today we're going to be talking about episode 5. We're going to discuss the episode, we're going to break it down like we always do. We'll obviously go back and forth with you guys in the chat, so if there's any questions, ideas, suggestions, theories that you want to throw out there while we're talking about particular scenes, do just let us know, throw it into the chat and we'll pick it up as we go along. But first, obviously, as I said, Anna, you weren't here last week. So I guess we should restart by asking you, everyone knows what I thought of episode 4 because I sat here and spoke by myself for 2 hours about it. But Anna, what did you think about episode 4?
You know what? I think that it was probably a good week for me to miss, because it might be controversial, but as a whole, I was not a huge fan of episode 4. It's weird because there were a lot of scenes in the episode that I loved. Like, I love a lot of the things, with the Isildur, the Pelagia storyline, the scenes with Arondir and the Ents were just like so Tolkienian and so heartwarming. And then I really liked the introduction of the stores as well, and the little romance we got between Poppy and, I remember him calling himself Nobody, but I cannot now remember his actual name.
Merrimack.
Merrimack. So I thought that was really cute. But as a whole, it just didn't do it for me, and I'm so sorry, guys. I'm so sorry to say, but I was let down by Tom Bombadil. I don't think that Rory Kinnear did a bad job at all. I just think I think it's my own fault because I don't think they ever could have portrayed Tom Bombadil in a way that I wanted that would have made sense and kind of fit in with the show. So I let myself down with that one.
It's funny because I think everyone who was here last week will know that I was a fan of certain bits. I really didn't care for any of the Harfoot stuff beyond the nice little foreshadowing of the Shire with the whole wall painting of the Suzat. That was lovely. But actually, what you will have missed because you weren't here, although you may have jumped in briefly when I was talking about it, but I love Tom Bombadil. He was great, and I have said that the reason I like him is probably the exact same reason why you and others don't. Is that he's Tom Bombadil, but like toned down by about 80%,
Yes.
and that
Tom
works for me.
Bombadil catered towards Harry. And
He
listen,
is.
that's fine. I'm glad that you're happy, but I just, the one thing that I have is that Old Tom Bombadil is still like the greatest song I've ever heard in my life. So even if I'm not a huge fan of the man himself in the show, I've got that song and it's very dear to my heart already.
Yeah. Well, I mean, listen, here's what I think. I think Rory is incredibly charming. I think they got the warmth of Bombadil, even if they toned down the whimsy. Although I think him, like, toying with the stranger while he was in the bath, saying, I'm on my own, you're here, aren't you? Like, all that stuff. And, I think
Yeah.
I think he was whimsy in a more grounded way. And you never know.
Yeah, I think I don't
Sorry.
know if it worked for me because I think some of the whimsical aspects I feel like you have to kind of go full force with. Like, I appreciate that they tried to get his singing in there, but the way that he kind of was just talking to the stranger and then he turns around and kind of mumbles a bit of a song, I was like, it doesn't do
He
it
what
for me. It
he
doesn't.
wasn't mumbling. He was just, singing
He was
softly to himself.
mumbling.
He doesn't need to like yell. He's on his own. He's in the middle of the desert. There's no reason for him to be kind of yodeling out of tune.
We've kind of separated the chat here already. We've got like a little war going on. Like, I side with Harry, I side with Anna.
I only see people saying they
This is
side
why
with
it's good
me.
that I wasn't here last week.
I don't see anyone siding with you.
Okay.
I'm just ignoring those comments, even though I know some of the people. But no, I totally get why some people didn't like that. Yeah, and episode 4 was a weird one that, like the Barrow-wites didn't quite work for me. Like it was just it was a bit of a nothing scene that didn't do anything for me, and it wasn't particularly well directed or lit in terms of the action. So it was just a bit. I was kind of left feeling a bit flat after it. But equally, there was lots of great moments in the episode. Elrond and Galadriel's conversations throughout I thought were brilliant, really interesting kind of look into their dynamic. And I thought, like I said, I thought the stuff with the stranger and Bombadil, where we were kind of reusing Bombadil's dialogue to Frodo in the books, I thought was really effective. So yeah, no. Overall, I think we both had a mixed opinion on the episode, but I think episode 5 we're both a lot more positive, and B, probably a lot
Yes.
more aligned on what we liked. And for once, I think we might even find ourselves agreeing on some things, which is crazy.
I know. One of the things we agree on as well is quite a controversial one, I'm sure.
Yeah, exactly. We'll get to that. But I do also just want to pull out this very lovely comment from Boo, who said, "I have to say, I love the show, but I think your podcast is actually better than the show itself." I mean, talk about a compliment. Thank you so much. That is very kind. I don't think we are better than
That
the
is
show
very
itself,
sweet.
but maybe we are more efficient with our budget. They've got hundreds of
I
millions
think
of dollars.
I think you're a very good addition to the show, Harry. And I'm not just saying that because you invite me onto the podcast almost every week, but I think even if I didn't know you and I wanted some kind of knowledge about the show after watching it and everything, I'd come and visit the Daily Rings of Power page.
Wow. Well, two things. One, I can't believe you actually said something so nice to me. But two, I also thought when you said you're a lovely addition to the show, I thought you meant this show, the podcast, and you were just sort of taking ownership and saying, you're a really nice addition to my show, the Daily Rings of Power show, which I, Anna,
Yeah.
host. Yeah,
I mean, if it's what the people want.
it is what the
I'm
people want.
joking, I'm joking.
All right, okay, we'll stop with our nonsense and our whimsy. But cheers to everyone in the chat. Thank you so much for being here. As usual, Anna and I have some wine. And to the person last week who said, Harry, why are you always drinking wine when you do this? I do this once a week. I'm not an alcoholic. I don't really drink the rest of the time. So please, don't worry
Listen,
about me.
as Celebrimble would say, it's time to open a first stage bottle. And that's
It
just what
is.
we do.
It is. Or in my case, it's to open
Except
a
mine's
cheap bottle
probably
of...
from this year.
I was going to say, mine's a cheap bottle of wine from Aldi, so I mean, not exactly first age wine. But okay, we're not going to spend time talking about episode 4. If you want to go listen to last week's discussion, where you'll also get treats like me doing an impression of Bane, or there was a lot of digression. Anna's pulling a face, but for those of you who were there, it got a
Sorry,
little
I've
bit
not
of out of
actually
hand.
heard that.
It's very good. I'll
But I
send it
might
to
need
you
to go
later.
back and listen.
It's really good. Anyway, we're going to talk about episode 5. So when episode 5 came out, Anna, I tweeted, I think my first reaction and the only thing I retweeted out after watching it was saying that was the best episode so far. And I actually only meant this season, although I have seen people saying, it's their favorite episode across both seasons. I'm not sure I'd go that far. But for me, easily the best episode of season 2 and one of the best, maybe top 3 episodes the season's ever done. But what did you think about episode 5?
I think that I'm sort of in the same basket as you with the best this season. And it was hard for me. I kind of went back and forth because I really, really loved episode 3. And I think half of me just wants to stick to that because episode 3 was my favorite in season 1. So I just wanted to be consistent. But I think this episode just blew out of the park. The Númenor plot has always been my favorite. I find it like the most compelling, and just Númenor in general in the Second Age is such an interesting part of Middle Earth and just kind of the history of the world that seeing it kind of brought to life is just, it's like incomparable. And then you have that with the Eregion things happening alongside it, and it's like everything that I want in one. And one thing that I will say is that as much as I love the Harfoot storylines, like I will defend them relentlessly in season 1, this episode made me kind of wish that they were really toned back, because I like how much content we got from the other storylines, and I was like, okay, we don't need like an hour of them just kind of walking across ruins. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think I agree with you on that. Just like you were, I was a huge defender of the Harfoot plotline in season 1, and I still think it was a great addition to the show. And I know people will have these back and forth arguments at it, but I actually think they did the right thing by including it. But this season hasn't worked as well for me, and also I felt like it hasn't done enough to justify the amount of screen time it had, especially across the first 4 episodes. And especially when, well, 2 things, I guess. One, Númenor has been, so underserved this season in terms of screen time. I think that has been an issue for a lot of fans, and I'll get on to later why I think it's an issue, and it's not actually for book fans, weirdly enough. But the other thing is that, the showrunners and the writers and the cast have talked about Sauron and Celebrimbor's kind of relationship being the spine of this season. And up until episode 5, I was kind of sitting there thinking, right, you've given us tastes of it, you've given us moments of it, but if this is the spine of the season, I shouldn't really be going an episode without seeing them, and I should be feeling like we're constantly following their relationship, even if it's just a few scenes each episode. I think, it's important. And I think what we're going to see by the time the season's finished is that basically from episodes 5 to 8, it really is going to focus on Celebrimbor and Sauron's kind of, this final act of their story. But definitely kind of episodes 1 to 4, I was like, I liked what I saw from them, but I wanted more. And I think that's why this episode worked so well. I mean, the Númenor stuff was brilliant. The Khazad-dûm stuff was very good. But for me, what really made this episode was every single scene with Charlie Vickers and Charles Edwards. I just thought they knocked it out the park, honestly. And it was I'm not going to say it was the exact relationship that when I read the books I think about the two of them having, but it was about as close as I could expect from an adaptation.
I mean, I think every time they're on screen together, it's just like masterful, just the way they kind of bounce off each other. The highlight for me was definitely Númenor. This is the screen time that I think they should have had the whole way through. And I'll get onto it a little bit more when we talk about kind of Númenor specifically. But this is what I wanted from it. And I'm kind of sad that we've got to this point without the build-up I thought we should have had for it. I don't know if that makes sense. But oh my goodness, it was so wonderful. I've been begging to see Elendil again for so long, and now we have him. And he's having the worst time, but it's so good. And then we sadly said goodbye to one of our favorite supporting characters, which is very sad. We might talk about that a little more, but very, very unexpected. I saw the episode actually a few days after it came out, because I couldn't watch it on the day that it aired. And everyone the whole time had been telling me, it's very painful, we're not going to spoil it for you, but just good luck.
Yeah.
Didn't think Valandil was gonna...
Yes, indeed. Indeed. You've certainly made that feel as sad as it should be. Right. So we've kind of covered our overall thoughts. I don't know if I'm just seeing whether there's other people in the chat kind of talking about their overall thoughts. Kansu Ergun says, best so far. I'm glad there was more Númenor. I was waiting for more Númenor. I'm satisfied and couldn't take my eyes off of Lloyd Owen. I mean, that last part is a very...
Oh
I
my
see that
God.
Anna's just muted herself so that she can... You were about to take a sip of wine and then you stopped yourself just to agree with the Lloyd Owen thirsting. That's correct, isn't it? Yeah, that's what I thought. Matt C said, so many moments felt so rushed, but when I look back, they really had all the most important pieces. Yeah, I think fundamentally the pacing of this season is just a hell of a lot quicker, and it's not something I enjoy, but when I talk to people who maybe weren't fans of the first season or who aren't book readers, I tend to find the feedback I get a lot is, oh, I'm really enjoying this season. It's moving so much quicker. Things are happening so much quicker. And so, listen, I understand why the showrunners are doing it. And by the way, I really don't want to get into the conversation about the show should have more episodes. Listen, guys, the showrunners don't get to decide it. The writers don't get to decide it. The actors don't. This is something that is imposed by streaming studios. And we could sit here all day and say, I wish it had more episodes, but this just isn't what streaming companies are going to do. And so I always say, don't criticize a show for what you'd like it to be. Criticize a show based on what it is. And what we have to critique is how well something works in 8 episodes. And I don't think it's particularly helpful to say all they need is more episodes, because that's not going to happen, I guess.
Well said, Harry.
Thank you. A few more comments from the chat. Jessica says, obviously the Stranger Half-Foot storyline will converge with some of the others at some point, and then the screen time dedicated to them will pay off. Yeah, listen, I hope so. I mean, for those of you who listened to mine and Anna's, I think it was probably about 10 episodes ago on the podcast, we did an episode talking about our hopes for season 2 before any of the trailers had come out. And one of my hopes was that I wanted all the storylines to feel connected and important, and Rune and the Harfoots and the Stranger was the one that I was most concerned about. And so far, it hasn't for me, but fingers crossed it will do by the end of the season.
I agree. There's actually a lot of good comments, like so many that I don't even know how to get to them. I'm going to go to Jessica again, who says, I feel like we knew Valandil would die, but didn't think it would be so soon. I'm with you on that one, because I always thought that it would be kind of before Isildur has his sons, because, he names one of them Valandil. You'd probably assume it's like a kind of memorial thing, but didn't think it would be now. Didn't think it would be at the hands of that little weasel.
Exactly.
But
Weasel.
yeah.
That is the right word for him. Absolute weasel. I just want to address this latest comment, because Anna, I told you this happened last week, but Stanley's here, and Stanley says, Anna's back, yay. And Stanley, I just want to tell you, I remember you being here last week and complaining that Anna wasn't here, as if I wasn't enough on my own. And I just want to tell you, I'm not particularly pleased you're back. Anna might be pleased you're back, but I refuse to accept your happiness, Stanley.
Listen, guys, as egotistical as it might make me, I like it when you guys are like, we missed you so much last week, so like, keep it coming. Keep it coming.
keep it up. Right, okay, we are going to get on to going storyline by storyline through the episode in a second, so we'll return to some of these thoughts about Kemen and Valandil a little bit. But nice to see other familiar faces in the chat who've joined since we started, like Halbrand's Pouch, Beric, Naomi. So lovely to see all these people. And Nick says he's...
Excuse me, Harry. Halbrand's Pouch has been here the whole time, you fake fan.
All right, I'm sorry. I'm only slightly busy trying to host the stream and do everything else while you sit there drinking wine and occasionally going, isn't Lloyd Owen handsome? So, I mean, yeah, I'm sorry that I'm not keeping track of everything. Isn't he just, though? Okay. Right. We're all happy everyone's here. I'm pleased to see all of you. You're all pleased to see Anna. Some of you are pleased to see me. But anyway, the point is we're now going to get into our discussion of episode 5, going, as we always do, storyline by storyline. We don't go chronologically scene by scene, because believe it or not, that would somehow take us longer than these already do. So we are going to start off. I imagine people would think we'd start with Khazad-dûm and Eregion, but we're actually going to start with Númenor, just because we were talking about this, and I think we both feel like Númenor has had so little screen time this season. We need to start with it because it's finally an episode where there was a good, healthy amount of scenes. There was some really interesting scenes, some really interesting kind of references to the books in there, and so yeah, we're gonna dive in with Númenor. So let me get my slides. What a pun?
Dive into Númenor.
Oh, in that case, very much no. I'm just that good. Anyway, we're back here with Númenor, and hopefully this screen share is working. I'll just check on the live stream that this has worked. Also, I've just checked the stream, and it really does bother me that despite the fact I have a very, not not expensive, it's cheap, but an HD camera, I'm like a blurry blob, and you're just like this pristine. Anyway, it's fine. It's not
For
bothering me at
once.
all. Yeah, I know.
I'm
I know.
usually the blurry one.
I know. It's so upsetting to me. Anyway, so we're going to start off with Númenor. Now, Númenor was fantastic this episode, but I actually want to start with the first scene from this episode, which was the scene of Kemen and Valandil looking out, and not Valandil. Oh God, no! there's a Freudian slip, but in the worst possible way. They really weren't looking out at the horizon together. No, Kemen and Farazon, father and son, were looking out over the horizon as Farazon talked about the White Tower of Eregion. Now, I want to start, before I get your thoughts on this scene, Anna, I want to tell you a really embarrassing thing, which it wasn't until I was doing my final rewatch this morning, and I was getting these slides together, that I realised this shot here, that's Eregion. It's not Númenor. I just thought like the problem was basically like I knew the scene with Farazon and Kemen was coming because I'd seen it in the trailers, and like so I heard Farazon's voice and he's talking about Eregion, and I saw, don't get me wrong, I saw the White Tower on the screen, I saw the green land, but for some reason my brain just went, oh, that's Númenor and that must be the capital, not thinking that like Armenelos is inland, not thinking like that this is obviously Valinorian imagery. So I just wanted to, in case anyone else is as stupid as I am, please understand it took me 6 days to
No, I
realise
mean,
this was Eregion.
it didn't quite take me 6 days, but I was with you on my first thought that I thought that he was just kind of envisioning it, like not literally looking out towards it. It did take me a second to be like, oh, okay. But, oh, I mean, it was just a great introduction to Númenor this episode, I think. And I really like that they started out with Farazon, because, you know, we kind of leave him at this moment where you don't really know how I mean, you have a good feeling of how the coronation's going to end. Everyone's chanting Farazon, and could they have bridged the gap between that and this next part a little bit? I don't know. But I do like that they kind of establish it pretty well. You know, he stood there holding the scepter. The colours that he's in, the colours that Kemen are in, you're like, okay, he's established his role now. And just the quote that he says, I think you noted it down before. I reckon the elves placed it there on purpose, so that every sunset serves as a reminder that our days must end and theirs will not. That no matter how high we climb, some things will be forever withheld from our grasp. Just, it's so good, and it really builds on kind of what he was talking about through the whole of season one. And I just love the really cynical way that he talks about the elves. You know, I reckon the elves placed it there on purpose. He takes everything as this kind of slight towards men, and not even thinking that there could be other reasons for this design, other reasons for this kind of geography. It's just, I everything about his character and Tristan, it's like, I think I said at the beginning of the season, you know, that I'm gonna love to hate him, and I do, because Tristan just plays him so well.
Yeah, it's. Do you know what? The way I think about this scene is this is the scene all of us who have read the Silmarillion and know about Númenor's story. This is almost the scene we've been waiting for a whole season, where they really start to dive into, like, fundamentally what is at stake with the Númenorians. Now, I think they hinted at it well in episode 8 of season 1, where Farazon's looking at, you know, the recently deceased king, and he's talking about, you know, the fate of men to die, and the one that, you know, the fate that awaits them all. But this was the first time I think that they ever properly had Farazon enunciate that for the Kingsmen and for those in Númenor who've turned away from the elves and from the Valar, the specific reason is because they feel like immortality is being withheld from them for no good reason, and they have forgotten that mortality, the gift of Ilúvatar, it is a gift for a reason. It is a gift not to be tied to Arda, which is the earth. It's a gift not to, as the elves are. The elves inherently, and the reason why they fade within Middle-earth, is because they are inherently tied to Arda, which has been marred by Melkor, who then becomes Morgoth, the original Dark Lord. But I do think it's funny something you said there about the fact that Pharazôn can only conceive of the idea that Erisea was put within sight just to insult them, whereas in reality, Erisea is that. I mean, we won't get into all the Silmarillion details, but for those who don't know, Erisea is basically where it is because the Valar used it as a giant floating cruise ship to get the elves from Beleriand to Valinor before even the First Age began, kind of after the elves first awoke in Cuiviénen and went on their great journey. And then obviously Númenor itself comes later. But what I did like is that they kept the fact, which is something that's mentioned by Tolkien in the Akallabeth, which is you can only see the White Tower of Erisea from the top of the Meneltarma. And I don't know whether they're going to do anything with that, but I am still really hopeful we get, because one of the things we learn in the Silmarillion is, or it might be Unfinished Tales, I'd have to check exactly where it is that the only real religious acts in terms of service and acts of worship that the Númenorians did was when they ascended to the peak of the Meneltarma, and there would be the 3 prayers to Eru. Anyway, it's not that interesting to talk about, but the only reason I bring it up is because I'm kind of hopeful that we are going to see Míriel at some point. I know she's not queen anymore, but I still hope we're going to see her ascend the Meneltarma before, her final ascent, shall I say. And I would really like there to be that contrast of her ascending to the peak of the Meneltarma as if to see Erisea. But of course, she's blind, and so she's not going to be able to see it. And so I just thought this whole conversation about sight and the Valar, and for me, this was what I've been waiting for 2 years.
I think it's a really good way to frame kind of where Pharazôn and Míriel are as well, because even just from a visual standpoint, Pharazôn is standing kind of, I think it's in the throne room with his son looking out towards this tower. He can see the whole of Númenor from where he's standing, or the whole of Armenelos. And then the scene we get directly afterwards is Míriel in the dark, kind of cooped up in her room. And I feel like that's very evocative of kind of where they are mentally, but kind of how much they're able to kind of conceive and actually see at the moment. She's very much in the dark. She's kind of trapped, and Pharazôn's kind of looking out to this new horizon. He's got Númenor in his palm, basically. And then I think one thing I just wanted to touch on was what you said about... Sorry, did you have something to say then?
Well, no, I'll let you continue a second, but I was only going to add that I think there was something lovely about the repeated motif of the sunrise and sunset. Obviously we had it in season 1 with the whole sailing into dawn scene in episode 5, and then Elendil in episode 6 talking about how he'd always been sailing into the sunrise, but now it felt like he was sailing into the sunset. And it's this whole really interesting idea of, is the sun rising on Númenor right now, or is it setting on Númenor right now? And that it's a very simple thing, but I love that. And obviously the way the show has used the sun as the symbol of Númenor, I like that they're keeping that kind of, it's both a storytelling thread, but it's also just a visual language thing they keep using. So I really love that.
It is good, and I like the way they kind of weave these things through seasons. It's, as you say, it feels very, it draws you back to last season and the threads that they kind of laid there for us to pick up this season again. And the one thing I wanted to touch on that you talked about was the fact that, you said this is a scene that us book readers, kind of people who've read the Silmarillion or the kind of wider works around Númenor in the Second Age, is what we've been waiting for about this debate between the kind of elves, the men, the faithful, the kingsmen. Because I was talking to someone in work today who's a fan of the Lord of the Rings films, The Rings of Power, but they've never kind of really read around Tolkien. And one of the things they said was they were like, they don't like the Númenor plot because they don't understand where any of this has come from. Yep. It feels like it's kind of gone from 0 to 100. And as we've read the Silmarillion, we've read kind of around, we knew to expect this conflict between the King's Men and the faithful. So I feel like we were almost looking out for those seeds that were being planted in season one. So to us, it might have felt obvious, but to a more casual viewer who hasn't maybe read the books or anything and doesn't know what to expect from this storyline, I can imagine that scenes like this, where it's all kind of going from 0 to 100 with this conflict, are just kind of like, why is this happening? What is this conflict based on? And why am I supposed to care about it? You know?
Yeah, I think that's a real issue they've got. And I was actually, when I said earlier that I think the pacing has worked well for for non-book readers better than it has for book readers. I think this is an area where it hasn't, because one of the things I like to do in between the episodes is each week is I try and watch a few different reaction videos on YouTube. I mean, most of them annoy me. No offense to Americans, but some of them are just too American about it, and it seems like they can only watch things by relating it to like Marvel comics films, and anyway, I'm not gonna get on that rant. But anyway, the point is that one thing I've consistently noticed is that a lot of them saying like, why am I supposed to care about this Númenor stuff? Or like when they're in a Númenor scene, they're like, I know I should feel connected to this, but I don't. And I think the problem is that they haven't done the legwork across the first season and a half. Now I guess we're a season and a half in, to get people invested, because in season one Númenor's plot was so revolving around Galadriel's involvement there. And then I think one of the characters they probably actually became closest to was Isildur, because he was almost really our more human point of view into Númenor in season one, and now in season two he's away from Númenor. And so I think unless you're someone who hasn't read the books, who was very invested in say Elendil and Míriel, or just finds humans more interesting, I totally get why people are less interested in that. And I think, without spoiling anything for the future, because I know there are people who listen to the podcast and watch the streams who haven't read the books, all I hope is that the end of the Akalabeth story isn't going to be told next season. I think it's fine to do some of it next season, but I think the culmination of the Akalabeth should be saved for season 4, at least midway through season 4, because I think you're going to need a solid season, at least, to really set the emotional stakes, to introduce characters like Anarion, potentially Valandil as well. And I think that's how you'll get people more engaged with Númenor, introduce more characters, spend more time there. And obviously this season they need to devote a lot of time to Eregion, to Galadriel, to Adar, to Sauron, to the dwarves as well. And the dwarves totally make sense to be a focus this season. I don't want to take anything away from that. But I'm with you on this. I think for the casual audience, there just hasn't been enough legwork done. So while you and I and many other people can appreciate this scene, I can definitely see how it wouldn't land for other people. And they'd appreciate the stream as well.
That's two Freudian slips in a row, Harry.
Cheers.
No, but I think you're completely right. And the pacing of this season does worry me for where exactly the Akalabeth's going to happen. I'm with you. I hope it's in season 4. I hope it's late season 4. But it is going very, very, very fast.
Yeah.
I think there's the few scenes from Númenor we have now, and I'm glad that we've seen them, but I think they could have been saved for the end of season 2 and kind of focus the beginning of season 2 more on the build-up of this tension, rather than it just kind of erupting. And I don't think they've done it too bad, because I think that the points of conflict that they showed us this episode were good, but it's things like we have this scene of Farazan and Kemen talking, which is a really good scene. I think I saw the Melonheads before say that it was their favorite scene from the whole episode. I can see why. It was really well done. And we get this moment where Farazan basically holds Kemen's mother's words about her son's life over his head, basically to kind of keep him under his thumb, keep him doing what he wants. But then the next scene we have Kemen he's kind of just doing everything he says, and he's snapped from almost this kind of, he's a bit unsure about what his dad's doing. He wants to please him, but he doesn't really know if he kind of agrees with the politics. And then all of a sudden he's this kind of like smug, he's kind of doing this without remorse, and I feel like I don't really know how we got there that quickly.
Oh, I completely bought that. I think he's always been portrayed as a smug sycophant who wanted to impress his father. Like, if you go back and watch all his scenes in season one, like he is very on brand from kind of then to now. So I was less bothered by that. I also just wanted to pause and address Anne, who's in the comments. Obviously, everyone knows Anne from Twitter as the number one Valandil stan and lover,
I
and
am.
Anne, you know. Rest in
Sorry.
peace. But Anne says, just tuning in for a little bit as she's starting season 2 of Slow Horses tonight. By the way, I have been recommending to people to watch Slow Horses for like 2 years now. And now people are like, oh my god, Jack Loudon, who played Sauron, is in it. I'm going to watch it. And I'm just going to say, you've been missing out for a long time, but don't listen to me. Anyway, sorry, back to Anne's comment. But I wanted to say that I completely agree that Númenor has suffered in terms of pacing and screen time. We received way too little this season. The coronation should have been the finale of the Númenor plotline, and they should have spent the little screen time they had building up to it. It's interesting. I don't know if I would go as far to say that I think the coronation should have been the end of the season, but I think even if you were going to have it in episode 3, I think you needed more in, you know, you needed actual scenes in episodes 1 and 2. And Anna, I know we talked about this a few weeks ago, but like we've been saying this since October 2022 when we said the biggest problem with Númenor at the end of season 1 is that we never got a scene showing everyone reacting to the return of Míriel and Elendil and the loss of all the soldiers. And that just because that never happened at the end of season 1, um, season 2 not having that at the start, it's just it's kind of a cascading issue. But like we
Yeah.
said, I think they're trying to make up for it now.
Yeah, and I mean, the first. It's like you said, we didn't get this reaction of them returning to Middle Earth. And then in episode 3, the first kind of scene we got of Miriel is her being slapped. And it's like, how did we escalate? How did we get here? You know, what caused this? And I'm like, I don't know if I would say the coronation should have been the end of season 2, but I think it should have maybe been at least a cliffhanger later on in the season, you know, maybe an episode 6 cliffhanger. And I think it's rage bait, but I'm just going to say, Gus, that it's already been greenlit for season 3, and it's probably going to get 5 seasons, so you
It's all right,
can.
guys. Don't
This
worry.
isn't for you.
Don't worry. I
No.
might be new to streaming, but if there's one thing I'm good at Twitter that I've brought over here is that I'm good at blocking people. So Gus is, don't worry guys, I've already blocked Gus from the channel. And the best thing about YouTube, and if you guys don't have a YouTube channel, you won't be aware of my favorite feature, which is if you get people being really rubbish or just kind of trolls or horrible in comment section, you can click to hide them from your channel. So they'll still leave comments thinking they're getting all angry, but you never see it, and it's great, and no one else
That's
sees it.
wonderful.
And so it's one of my it's one of my favorite things to do on YouTube. Anyway, see, yeah, Higgy's acknowledged. I did it in 10 seconds. Anyway, the last thing I want to say about this scene before we get on to the next one is that I thought it was a really nice reference to have Farazan's whole kind of re-manipulative approach towards Kemen be grounded in this idea that his mother foresaw his fate. And for those of you who've read the Silmarillion and Unfinished Tales, you know this is something that Tolkien himself said, that the women of Númenor had this kind of, or not all of them, but, you know, many of them had this kind of prophetic ability, and the ability, it's not exactly the same as the elves' gift of foresight, but it's more a kind of ability to prophesize and scry things. And so I thought that was really lovely. But I also thought, and I don't have a screen cap for it, but and it wouldn't work anyway because it's the tone of Farazan's voice and the way he looks at Kemen when he says, you know, impress me on this task that I'm about to place upon you, or I will have to find other places to make use of you. I was like, I don't even know what Farazan is referring to, like where he's going to send him or what he's going to do with him. But I was genuinely uncomfortable in that moment. I really, really didn't know how to feel about the way Farazan was talking to his son there.
Can I just say that what I'm going to say is that I wasn't on board the Hot Farazan train in season 1, and I don't know whether it was meeting him at the premiere or just what we've got from him in season 2, but I'm on board. I'm on board, guys. His beard's looking sleeker, his clothes are looking sleeker, and he's slightly more menacing this season, which I can appreciate. Okay, and then I think you're right. I think his relationship with Kemen is really interesting, and I like that they've given him that person to kind of reflect onto. And I think that it's also going to be a nice parallel to Isildur and Elendil. They're both kind of sons struggling to get their father's approval. That's what we saw in season one. And Farazan's using that look for approval for all the wrong reasons. He's going to use that and use Kemen to kind of further his own agenda. And listen, Elendil, he's not winning any Father of the Year awards this year. I'm just going to say it. But he's a good person, and he would never use his children to kind of further his own goals. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's what sets him and Farazan apart in that respect.
Did you see what Lloyd said in the behind the scenes video for episodes 5?
I haven't seen it yet.
Okay, I tweeted it out so people can go find it if they want, but basically there's a bit where he says, I can at least say that Elendil's a better father than Farazan, because Farazan made Kemen. I was just like... harsh, I was going to say harsh on Kemen, not really, but I just thought, I love that Lloyd's got into character enough that he's like, I might be a bad father, but none of my children are as bad as Kemen.
I think before Alex, who plays Valandil, very nice guy. He interacts a lot with the Rings of Power community. He retweeted a tweet before that said something along the lines of the Valar have blessed Elendil to kind of drop kick Kemen or something like that.
Yeah,
Which
it's
good. I think everyone's just
so
kind of Kemen hate squad.
well, yeah, I think we all are. I mean, I know Anne was simultaneously a Kemen stan and a Valandil stan, which I know Anne knows this, but as I explained to Anne, that was always going to end in tears. So I mean, I
One more thing.
yes,
We were right about the drowning. Can I just say for everyone who said that Kemen was helping Valandil out of the water,
let's go.
What did we say? He was
Yeah,
drowning him.
let me get real close to the mic. We fucking told you so. You wouldn't fucking listen to us, but we told you so. Anyway, yeah, no, I feel bad because now obviously Anne's lost Valandil, and so I don't want to use this as an I told you so moment, but equally I do remember the trauma that you all put us through when me and Anna were doing our breakdown of the trailer, and many of you were doing your best Anatar impression and gaslighting us about that scene.
Yes.
So, listen, I am still sorry for your loss for all you Valandil fans, but, this is what you get when you gaslight us. Right, we're going to take a quick breath from Kemen's awfulness and head across to our favourite doomed will they won't they lovers. And I just loved the way they entered into this scene with this camera on this Dutch angle, both Farazan and Míriel unsteady and uncertain of their new position, almost like the ship of Númenor has been rocked and they're no longer on on bad. Sorry, I just saw Anne saying, you guys are laughing at me now. It's so insensitive. I have become a widow and you guys are mocking me. I mean, listen, yeah, it is insensitive, but if nothing else, I do be a petty man, and I will be it. But yeah, anyway, returning to Míriel and Elendil, I mean, Anna, what do we even say about this? I mean, for people like me and you who are just hoping for this secret doomed romance, I mean, this was good.
Oh, it was so good. I'm just going to talk about the two of them first. It's as you said before, it kind of goes, it's kind of slanted this shot of them, and it's so good. And the way they kind of slowly approach each other. Míriel obviously has her hand out because she's blind now. She needs that kind of help with that. But it's when she places her hand on his chest for the first time, and you see him look down really unsure, and then he raises his hand as if he's gonna kind of grab onto hers, but then she takes her hand away, and he drops his hand, and you're just like, guys, just kiss, please.
I know. It's just, you know what it reminded me of, and I know you weren't here for episode 4, but I forgot to say one of the things I loved about episode 4, and people who were here last week will know I am so in love with Isildur and Estrid's rom-com, will they, won't they? It is all I want from a TV show. I love a rom-com. I know that they're going to end up together. I'm not worried by this random man reappearing, who's probably her brother anyway. But this was seeing Elendil have that moment here, I was like, wow, it really is a genetic trait that they're both terrible with women. It's like Elendil can't even grab a blind woman's hand in time who has got her hand on his chest. I mean, I know he's a widow, or widower.
I quite like that they kind of set up they're naturals with horses. You know, they can calm a horse. They know exactly how to handle horses. But then they try and talk to a woman, and they're like, "Help!"
I
But
know
it's so
it
good. And I
turns.
think
What?
even
Hang on. This may be just based on what you just said. It turns out this may be the first time that I have actually felt quite Númenorian.
because you can't speak to women.
I can't speak to anyone really. It's not gender specific, but yeah, no, women in particular. But anyway, carry on. Go ahead. You want to talk seriously about this scene?
The only thing I was going to add on about those two specifically is that even that from the perspective of her blindness as well, you know, we know that Elendil is acting as her eyes and ears. So it's even whether he feels like, oh, does she want me? Is she only touching me because she's kind of trying to get her bearings in the room, or is she touching me because she wants me to hold onto her hand? Like, will she want this touch because it might kind of overwhelm her? It's just stuff like that. And listen, I will kind of parrot on about how much I love Lloyd Owen, but just his eyes and his face and the way he was kind of, you know, she can't see him, but he was still kind of like tilting his head towards her, like really compassionately. He was like, oh, it was just so good. And then you have Míriel on the other hand, and Cynthia is just, she does not get enough screen time this season so far. Like, she really has not had enough screen time at all, but what she's done with it is just like these two, whoever decided to make them kind of the duo in Númenor, I owe you my life. I do.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think Cynthia, every scene she's had this season, she knocked out the park. Whereas whether it was the scene where they were at the kind of funeral of Tar Palantir, or her scene with Pharazôn in this chamber, or the throne room scene, like every single scene that Cynthia's been in, she's just knocked it out the park. And I remember, I think we talked about this on one of our episodes before the season. She did a really long interview. I can't remember which site it was with, but when you hear her talk and when you read her long, thoughtful answers about Númenor's story, about Míriel's story, like, you can really tell that Cynthia just puts so much thought into every interaction she has to portray, every kind of sentence Míriel speaks. She's constantly thinking through how she should be playing it, and it really comes across. And then I think we get to kind of what the second most interesting thing in this scene was, outside of the beautiful romance that isn't quite a romance yet. Is this whole exchange where Míriel's kind of trying to gauge, because Elendil's obviously asking her, why won't you let me, coordinate the other faithful? We can still fight back against this, coup. We can still do something. There are people who love you. There are people who still, call your name as queen. And then she, asks him what he saw in the Palantir. And we get this wonderful shot, which I think is so fascinating. And I know people have had lots of different interpretations of it, and I think that's purposeful. I think there's lots of reasons why you can interpret this in different ways. But I do think, having seen how they've used other vision sequences in the show, I do suspect this is a very cynical part of me, but I do also think, like, oh, well, I guess we know what Elendil's last shot of episode 8 is going to be.
It's so good, and I don't want to, because I know there's probably maybe people in the chat who don't know what's going to happen to kind of Númenor, to all the specific characters in Númenor, but it breaks my heart that Míriel thinks that because this is what Elendil is saying, she thinks that Númenor is on the right path. She thinks that she wasn't the right choice to kind of lead Númenor. She thought that she was going to be the one to lead it to its destruction, and she thinks that they're on the right path now. It breaks my heart. This is why I don't think I'm okay actually with the Elendil Míriel romance, because
it doesn't have a happy ending.
But will I be happy at the end of season 4? No.
Yeah.
But it's just, I really like that they gave us this little glimpse, and it makes me excited to see more places maybe outside of our Menelaus, because we know Elendil leaves eventually. It's as you say, I'm hoping we get more characters introduced and more locations as well, because they do become very important as you kind of carry on into Númenor's story.
Yeah, and I mean, by the way, guys, I don't have any leaks about this. I know I have leaks about some aspects of Season 2's Númenor storyline. I'll actually get onto them in the next scene. But the thing I thought was interesting about this is, this for me feels like a very telegraphed that they haven't introduced Anarion yet for a reason, his second son. And I think what we're going to see is that at the end of season one, Elendil either leaves by his free will or flees from Armenelos and goes to find his other son and to connect with the rest of the faithful community. And I think the thing that is going to be difficult for him about this is both abandoning, the city and the people that he loves, but also abandoning Míriel and abandoning Eärien. And I think just because he and Eärien have a difficult relationship, and we'll get onto that in the next scene, I think it's very important to note that Elendil is still probably quite heartbroken the fact that she has gone down this path with Pharazôn. And I think some of it's coming out as anger at the moment, but I think given the fact, as we'll talk about in later scenes, that he's clearly still not processing Isildur's death. I think this is all part of it. So yeah, I think this is probably going to be finale of season 2. We're going to see Elendil flee the city. I will say one of the things that really struck me when I watched the scene for the first time, when I very first saw it, I thought it was Minas Tirith in the background, and it was just a reminder that they've done a really nice job of kind of paralleling the visual design of Minas Tirith with Armenelos. And it was only when I quickly noticed the Eärendil statues there that I was like, oh no, of course that isn't Minas Tirith. But I just thought it was nice that you could almost quick glance at it and think it would be Minas Tirith, obviously given where the future of the Númenorian story goes.
Talking about the design of Númenor, there's a comment that really, really made me laugh. Quirky Joe said that Isildur will be so pleased about the plans for a new aqueduct. So at least there's that. And then Beric says, and I think this is when we were talking about Anne and Valandil, it's okay, Harry's only got 2 to 3 more episodes to go.
Guys, when you guys try and make fun of me that my favorite characters are going to die, you have to remember I've known they're going to die for 20, 30 years, however long I've been reading the books, so you can't upset me. It won't upset me. I'm not going to be upset, probably.
I think one more thing I wanted to add on to that, actually, maybe this will kind of transition us into the next scene, I don't know. But talking about new characters and stuff, I know you mentioned Amandil before, who is obviously Elendil's father, and in the kind of Rings of Power universe, Eärion's grandfather. I'd love them to do a kind of, when Elrond and Galadriel were sort of fighting over the rings, and then they went to Gil-galad, and he was almost like that kind of disappointed father. I'd almost like for Amandil to come in and be this voice of reason, because a really interesting character trait of his, not a character trait, but kind of like part of his story is that he was, childhood friends with Pharazôn. So if he's seeing Eärien go down this path, if he's seeing what's happening, it would be so good to get his perspective on things. And I know he's not going to kind of pop in midway through this season and be like, hey doll, that's Tom Bombadil's job. But I would love to get him and his kind of perspective on Pharazôn, Eärien, all of that,
Yeah, I think there's a good chance we still might see him in season 3 or 4. I think for those of you who've read the Silmarillion, I think kind of Amandil's final act within his story in the Akallabeth is such a moving moment that I think as long as they can work with the Tolkien estate to get it. And once again, I'm going to say again, because I say this every time we talk about Amandil, but get Jared Harris to play Amandil. For any of you who've watched Chernobyl or The Terror or anything Jared Harris has been in, he's so good. I would love for Jared Harris to play Amandil. Anything else we want to say about this scene? I mean, we can talk about the fact there was a second chest touch, but this time it was Elendil pulling her hand away. I mean, will they, won't they? Make it stop.
You know what? My unpopular opinion is that they probably won't, but they're going to carry on the will they, won't they, kind of through the whole thing.
Yep.
Oh, goodness. But yeah, just look at the material we're getting, guys. I think we should really just kind of appreciate this while we have it.
Oh, definitely. I mean, when we first watched the show, who amongst us could have thought we were going to get a secret doomed will they, won't they romance between Elendil and Míriel? So really, we should just be glad for it. But
just, talking about the Míriel-Elendil relationship, one of the things, and I talk about it more when we get kind of further Elendil scenes, but, we're going to see Elendil's journey through Númenor to Middle-earth, all of this. And, he founds his own kingdom. And I just love the idea that he's kind of getting these seeds on how to lead and how to be a leader from Míriel. Like that's such a nice touch to bring that kind of part of Númenor over to Middle Earth, kind of a few seasons later.
Exactly. I just want to address a few people bring up. I see a lot of love for Jared Harris in the chat. Katie in particular saying Jared Harris in Foundation at the Expanse. Now I think he's brilliant in Foundation, and I know he's not in the Expanse for long. But those of you who've seen the Expanse, and if you haven't, you should because it's one of the best sci-fi shows of the last 20 years. There's a scene in season 1 where Jared Harris's character tells a story about his sister, and it is one of the most heartbreaking monologues you will ever see. So if you want to know why I think they should cast Jared Harris, I mean, if you've seen Chernobyl, you might get it. If you've seen The Terror, you might get it. If you've seen The Foundation, but season 1 of The Expanse, you'll really understand it. Anyway, yeah, we'll move on from the scene now because we spent quite a lot. And I know Anne's gone before we actually get on to Valandil's death. So I don't know. Maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's not, so that we're not re-traumatizing Anne. But thank you for your service, Anne. We now need to talk about this scene, which is the scene where Elendil goes into the streets. Obviously Míriel's told him to be the calm in the storm, to return to his ship, and obviously he's gone out into the city and found that those loyal members of the Sea Guard, of institutions, are being stripped of their ranks, of their titles. Basically this new crackdown from Pharazôn's regime onto any of the faithful, onto any who still support Míriel. And in an even more heartbreaking twist, that is not only that it's all of Elendil's old men from the Sea Guard there, but Eärien is one of the new bureaucratic officials who is, kind of instituting this crackdown, instituting this purge. And I thought there was something. Now, let me say two things. One, I think it makes absolutely no sense that Eärien, an apprentice in the Builders Guild, is apparently now she's kind of seems to be involved in the kind of Politburo of Pharazôn's new regime. But at the same time, I really liked that they have her involved in it, because I think there's a nice. It just adds more and more to this tension going on between father and daughter. And one of the things we said in season 1, I remember when we discussed it, was that we liked how what they were doing with Númenor was bringing the divide between faithful and the Kingsmen, which is this big macro societal level divide, and bringing it down to this kind of micro family unit split. And I really love that they've continued this, and it's why I'm so glad they have allowed Eärien to go down this route of siding with Pharazôn, siding with the Kingsmen, because it makes that divide within society so good.
I agree, and I think even from the standpoint of kind of how she's gone from just this apprentice to where she is now, I mean, I know that she says herself, don't reduce my grief to petty ambition, but of course, if she's kind of giving this information and she's helping out with Pharazôn and Kemen and everyone, she's gonna get these things that other people probably aren't getting. So I think it makes sense, and it's a really nice juxtaposition between her getting all of these titles to Elendil being stripped of his own. I think that they've kind of balanced that out really well. And I'm going to go straight into it and say that I support Eärien, and I think Harry is on the same page as me. It took me a moment because I was kind of mad when she first popped out in this episode. I was like, oh no, what are you doing? But I've leapt to her defense, and I'm ready to stick by her side because I get it. I don't agree with it, but I understand her, okay?
No, I mean, we are in complete agreement here. And I'll say that, just because I support her does not mean I am not acknowledging her crimes. She is committing many crimes and will no doubt continue to commit crimes against our favorite characters. But the point is that, that's good. That's fine. Let us have these characters who are making morally questionable decisions, and especially have them be ones who mean something to Elendil. If it was just some random bureaucrat who was stripping the titles and Elendil arrived, there's no emotional connection to Elendil to that. But with having Eärien involved, it's really lovely. And I'll also say, I know we haven't got to Valandil's death yet, but can I just say, it's really irritating seeing people blame Eärien for Valandil's death. She has nothing to do with Valandil's death. Quite literally nothing. And unless you want to kind of go back to a domino theory where, because she's involved in Pharazôn getting made king, therefore she's responsible for everything that happens afterwards, which I just don't think is a fair thing to say. But I really dislike people blaming her for Valandil's death in any way.
I mean, blaming Eärien for his death is the same as saying, well, if Elendil never punched Kemen, then the fight wouldn't have broke out, and blah blah blah. You can't domino this whole thing, And I'm just gonna really quickly lay out my defense for Eärien, and feel free to kind of add on to this, Harry.
Yep.
So she's a woman of Númenor who's never had much experience with war, okay? Her dream in life was to be an architect for the Builders Guild, you know? It was never kind of like Valandil or Ontamo or anyone to kind of go out and serve Númenor like that. The tensions were already fraught between the men and the elves in season one. You know, we saw that she was listening to that kind of big discussion in the center where Pharazôn gets up and makes this kind of rallying speech. At the end of season one, when Isildur is going off to war, she's not waving him off happily. You know, she clearly hasn't had the chance to say what she wants to say to him. She's looking at him in kind of distress. She's not happy to be saying goodbye to him. And in her eyes, it's Míriel's alliance with the elves and the use of the elf stone that caused her brother's death. And while don't agree as the audience, because Team Míriel all the way, of course, you can see how she reached that conclusion. And one other thing people were saying was like, okay, that's fair enough, but why does she have to be so smug about it? And the thing is, you know, we don't really know where she's at emotionally because we've not spent that much time with her just on her own. But she's going to be having really conflicting emotions about this. And in the face of her own father, she's going to want to put on this bravado that she knows she's made the right choice, even if she's kind of hesitant about it. So I don't think she's being smug. I think she's just kind of putting on this, it's fine, I know what I'm doing, everything's going to be fine kind of thing. And that's my defense for Aarion.
Yes, I would also like to add that, as many people know, and many people will know this about me, but I am actually a feminist. And so I just think there's a lot of people here not being very feminist, not supporting women in both their rights and their wrongs. And I think that's okay for you guys. But, for me, as a feminist, it's just, it's not okay for me to,
Let women
say,
commit crimes.
exactly, let women commit crime. And also, can I just say, I do find it a little bit the way people are like, I love Sauron, he's my little war criminal, but he's also my Pookie. And then, like, Aarion does a little bit of kind of mild cooing, in Númenor. She overthrows one queen, and suddenly, she deserves to be burnt, as a sacrifice. It just...
Yeah, I mean, Adar forms a coup against Sauron, and he is everyone's baby girl. And listen, he's my baby girl too, but you can't excuse the wrongs of men and refuse to do the same for the women, because the girls deserve to commit crimes too. And if down the line Aarion erects a temple for Morgoth, I'll be there to cheer her on, okay? As long as she's sacrificing Kemen at the altar.
I also think it's funny that Susie has left 2 comments while this live stream has been going on for an hour, and the second one is just to say, did I just hear Harry say Pookie? You did.
Jessica says Harry say meow meow.
I'm not a performing monkey. I'm not just going
Say
to
it.
say things. No. I did actually want
You're
to
gonna
address
start
another
losing
comment.
your viewers.
Oh, right. Well, they're only here for you anyway, so I doubt that's true. But I did think there was an interesting comment here from Martin, who said, I've mixed feelings with her because Elendil did say she mocks what is sacred, and she said she mocks what is absurd. So was that mocking the faithful's belief? Could be my mistake. No, but I think this is a really interesting point that, like, it's funny how, because of the way Tolkien writes Lord of the Rings, we all just kind of accept, like, oh, well, the Valar are real, and Eru's real, and, therefore, of course, the faithful are in the right. But for the men of Númenor, none of them were alive to see the Valar. None of them were alive to see, Númenor raised from the sea by the Valar. None of them have ever met one of the Valar. They've not, and obviously no one in Middle-earth has seen Eru, the one true god. But no one, none of the Númenorians have even seen about. They are folk tales. They are myth. They are much like, if you find it believable that people in our day and age are atheists, you should be able to find it believable that there are people within Númenor who are, even if they're not atheists in the modern secular sense, they certainly believe that if there are these gods, they certainly don't care for the Númenorians, because again, going back to Pharazôn's point about being denied immortality and being doomed to die and being forever in sight of Eregion and Valinor, but not being able to do it. So I actually think, like, that one comment I found really interesting, because I thought, while it's subtle and a lot of obviously non-book readers aren't going to read the implication there, I really like this idea that Elendil describes the Palantir as sacred because it's a gift from the elves of Valinor, and Aarion just sees it as this absurd relic of times gone by. And so I think I really like that.
I mean, even in season one, I don't, I only just thought of this because I was watching the White Leaves scene yesterday, I think it was, on YouTube, and the top comment said something like, imagine this scene, but it's just Halbrand at the top, like viciously shaking the tree so that all the leaves fall. And it is one of those things where it's like the petals fall from this tree as Galadriel is leaving, and that's Miriel's made up, because she is one of the faithful. She takes that as her sign. But to anyone else, anyone who doesn't believe in that, you'd find so many ways to explain that rationally. You'd say the wind picked up, Halbrand was shaking the tree. You'd try and justify it in any way you can. You wouldn't be like, oh, it's elf magic.
Yeah. Yeah, and as Beric says here, to make a more serious point than your one about Halbrand shaking the tree, Beric says there's also the whole rewriting of history and the abolishing of Quenya and the destruction of libraries in Númenor. Now, this is interesting because I think we saw in one of the trailers a scene that we haven't seen yet, which looks like all of the... if you remember the character from season 1, episode 3, when Galadriel and Elendil went to the Hall of Law in Númenor, there was a great scene. In that scene, sorry, there was the character who was kind of, the scholarly figure, the law master, one of the librarians essentially. And there was a scene in one of the trailers for season 2 where it looked like that group of individuals was basically being rounded up by Númenorian guards. So I do think we're going to see what has started as this small crackdown on the faithful, first within the ranks of the military, then expanding out into, places of worship. And then I think we're going to get to this idea that Beric's talking about, which that Farazan is going to start forcibly rewriting the culture and the history of Númenor.
Yeah, we see Kemen like physically destroying kind of this bust of Nienna, and it's that thing. It's destroying the kind of physical reminders they have of their faithfulness, taking them away from their places of worship. They're kind of forcing it to be only this mentality that they have. They don't have anywhere grounded to practice that faith.
Yeah, exactly. And just to round up with the scene, I thought it's not important, but one of my favorite lines here was when Kemen says, "How do you think this ends? Silence." And it's obviously Kemen is just meant to show that Kemen's got this insecurity here and he's trying to assert this authority that he doesn't even really have. And, it works on that level. But I also just thought it works as a great bit of foreshadowing. Obviously we won't get into it for people who haven't read the books, but I just love this idea at the moment when all the faithful are kind of crying out for Elendil and saying, "May the Valar protect you." And Kemen in response to that is saying, "How do you think this ends? Silence." And it's like, how do you think this ends, Kemen? That's the real question.
Can we talk about that moment for a second? There's two things that I want to touch on. One is that I feel like they really channeled the audience's hatred for Kemen through Elendil, because I don't think I've ever seen like aggression like it. That moment when he just turns around, smiles to himself, and is just kind of straight back around. But oh my goodness, that moment where he turns around and everyone said it, it's giving that kind of "oh captain, my captain, dead poets" thing. But oh my goodness, what a powerful moment. And this is what I've wanted from Elendil all season. And that was the moment where I was like, because they were saying, Captain Elendil, I captain, the Valar protect you. Seeing his journey from Captain Elendil to kind of the founder of Arnor and the king, it's just, I feel so lucky that we have kind of Lloyd Owen as the one to portray that, because he just is Elendil. Do you know what I mean?
No,
it's perfect.
It's been great to see this slightly rougher side to him this season, where, because now he's having to strike out on his own a little bit. It's been nice seeing him get to go away from just kind of being the stoic father and the captain and, the kind of advisor to Míriel. And now he's we're seeing these different sides to him, which I like. I know what I wanted to say. So people won't know this because this isn't a scene that I leaked, but I can talk about it now. So when I got my leaks about Númenor's season 2 storyline a year and a half ago, this is one of the scenes that was leaked to me. And when I say leaked, I mean I had it leaked in detail. So I had all the Sea Guard handing in their uniforms. I had Elendil coming along. I had Kemen's comment about, he's not a captain anymore. I even had a description of Elendil smirking and saying, "You're right, I'm not." But the reason I actually want to talk about having this leak is, obviously I didn't leak it, and I didn't leak most of them because I just didn't want to do that. But the most interesting thing about this, and I think it tells a really important lesson about why we have to be careful with leaks and rumors, is that the way the scene was described to me by the sources I had said that this was a scene of the Sea Guard being disbanded. So if I'd leaked this scene, even if I described it in perfect detail, and then we would have watched the show and everyone would have gone, "Oh, Harry, your leak was right," it would have been wrong because I would have been saying that the Sea Guard was disbanded, which isn't what's happening in the scene. It's that the faithful members are kind of being stripped of their ranks and their titles from the Sea Guard. And so I just wanted to bring that up, not as like a way for me to brag that I've known about this scene for a year and a half, but more to reinforce why, like, even someone like me who has these leaks, I can't be 100% certain that the way they're being described to me is 100% accurate. Like, obviously, the contents of the scene were, but
I do remember. I think this shot of Elendil that we got, of kind of him, Valandil's behind him, is one of the only shots of him we got in the trailer. So I remember we talked about it in kind of quite a lot of detail, and you let me theorize about what I thought was going on, and you were just kind of behind the camera, and you were like, I'm just gonna be quiet.
yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, but there we go. That's anyway. It's just a little moral of
Well
the
done,
story
Harry.
about leaks.
Do you want a round
Yeah.
of applause for not leaking that?
I wouldn't mind a little bit of gratitude, you know. Anyway, right, moving on. We then briefly get a shot of not Elendil. God, I'm getting all turned around. We get a brief shot of Pharazôn looking into the Palantir. I don't think we need to focus on this for now because I think we're going to see him actually look into the Palantir on next week's episode. So maybe let's just save our discussion for that. All we can say now is that yes, of course, Pharazôn's a hypocrite. Of course, he's going to, you know. Of course, he's going to use this against Míriel, and then the second he gets him out, he goes, "Actually, I might see if the magic orb's got anything for me in there." Actually, so I liked that we got this pretty quick turnaround of Pharazôn being like, "Well, you know, I'm a kind of utilitarian means justify the end type person, so I guess I'll look into it." But yeah, anyway. Now let's move on to the scene we've all been dreading or looking forward to talking about, which is, of course, the scene that I guess we first technically knew a little bit about from the soundtrack when we got the track title Candles on the Tide. And to be fair, that bit of the track was as beautiful as we thought, going to be this lovely scene of Elendil and Valandil and the other members of the Faithful casting these candles into the water in memory of those that they've lost. And then the scene takes a turn for the worst. I mean, Anna, I don't know where you even want to start talking about this scene, but it's just, I think we've had a few sucker punches across the, 13 episodes of The Rings of Power. I'm not sure any have hit me quite as hard as this one.
I think I'm with you on that. The one thing that I'll say, in maybe more of a negative aspect, is that this was such a beautiful scene, and it really played into what I love about the Faithful, that I wish we'd seen more of that worship before we get the first scene of it being kind of disrupted and destroyed. I think it would have really built up that kind of reverence, and if we see this being kind of a regular thing that happens, and I know that this specifically is a memorial, but they clearly have this place of worship, and I would have liked to have seen it explored a little bit more before its destruction. But I mean, I guess
it's
that's
interesting
just a
though.
Númenor storyline.
Yeah,
I mean, story
well,
time, isn't it?
it is, but also like in the books, Tolkien's pretty explicit that the Númenorians don't really do religious services. Like even the Faithful, they don't really have, like they don't have the equivalent of like Catholic mass or or going to evening prayers or anything like that. There isn't the same. It's not like kind of a lot of our real world religions where there are kind of weekly or more than weekly religious services to attend. But I agree with you that it. Again, this is where I go back to the point about the Meneltarma and the three prayers atop the Meneltarma. Like, it would have been nice if we'd had a scene of something like that. Like you say, it goes back to the Númenor plot, and we don't need to kind of retread old ground. But I agree with you that we probably should have had some display of the faithful and their faith before we saw, its repression, I guess is what you say.
Yeah, and I think the only other thing that I would say on this before I get into everything that I loved about it, because it is a really incredible scene, and this is just like a little nitpick, but I really couldn't help but notice it when it happened, and it was when I don't know if you'd call him kind of like a priest or maybe just a worshipper, is saying, the statue of Nienna needs to kind of be put away properly. She can't be left here. And they're really like, he's really kind of fighting against this, to the point where Elendil interjects, everything like that. And then Kemen drops the statue of Nienna, and the same guy just doesn't react to it at all. He's like, okay, you can take me away now. Like, let's go. But
He's in shock, Anna. He doesn't know what to say. He's
listen,
had his
I know
priceless relic
that's just my
destroyed.
little nitpick. But oh my gosh, guys, I don't know if I've probably said it before, but Nienna is my favorite of the Valar. Just she just speaks to me, and seeing her get described and seeing this kind of reverence towards her, they're feeling grief right now, and that they've brought her into that experience with them. It was so nice to see, even if she did get kind of smashed to pieces at the end of it. It was like a really beautiful scene, and I like it's as we say before, that connection between the faithful and the Valar is something that I hope they explore like a little bit more going forward. But the having a smashed statue of Nienna there as Valandil dies, oh my goodness.
It's really interesting as well because I think this scene works. The use of Nienna works on multiple levels. One being that obviously, as Nienna is kind of the Valar we associate with grief and loss and death and mourning. Obviously, it works on that very instinctual level. Again, Nienna is connected to Gandalf, obviously, who we read about in the Silmarillion. It is said that he learned patience and pity from Nienna. So, obviously, the stranger being in the show, I think it's nice that Nienna finally makes an appearance, especially in season 2. But I also think it was really, really interesting that what the kind of member of the faithful said about her, which he said, if she is not here, if Nienna's statue is not here, then the souls of those she weeps for will be lost. And this for me is so interesting because, of course, the faithful are, by definition, faithful to the Valar and to Eru. But like everyone else in Middle-earth, they don't understand where men's souls go when they die. Because if you read Tolkien's writings on this, no one knows where men's souls go when they die. They go beyond the walls of the world. They go outside of the physical universe. It's not like elves. When elves die, their spirits go to the halls of Mandos in Valinor, and then eventually they may be reincarnated if that happens. But for men, the only the only being that knows where men's souls go when they die is Eru, is God. And so it was really lovely for me to actually see that in place of the faithful, because it would be easy for the faithful to just say, oh, our souls just go elsewhere. But it was lovely that because even the faithful don't know where their souls are going to be, they've just decided that they're still going to worship Nienna because they know that Nienna is the Valar who grieves over the dead and over the loss of beautiful things and the loss of life. And so I thought that was a really wonderful way of showing what faith means in Tolkien's world, which is that core idea of believing even when you don't have the answers and having hope in something that you don't even know if it's going to save you. And I think having the faithful kind of pray to and honor Nienna in their shrine is just a really lovely way of doing that.
I completely agree, and I think, I know certain people feel very strong feelings towards Valandil, so I hope I don't offend anyone when I say that he wasn't like the biggest, he wasn't the biggest player in Númenor in season 1. But I like that they gave him that moment of faith. He was the one to kind of rally that cry against Elendil when he turns away and he's stripped of his title. And you say that thing about that's the reason why they have Nienna there at this almost funeral service. And you have to wonder, because we don't know that much about Valandil, but we do know that he's a very devout member of the faithful. He's faithful to Míriel, he's faithful to Elendil and to the Valar. And he watches this statue of Nienna get smashed, in their place of worship, and he dies next to those kind of discarded shards of the Nienna statue, and it makes you think, we'll probably never know, but it makes you wonder what he was thinking kind of as he died. Was he worried about what was going to happen to his soul? Was he worried about the future of Númenor? It's stuff that we'll probably never know, but I think it's a really interesting place to have someone die in that temple and next to that kind of smashed statue.
I love that. I also just want to highlight a couple of comments we got in the chat, which I think add more great kind of points on this. Which is Beric saying there's also that Míriel told Elendil to be patient, but then he tried to push Kemen into being respectful to the statue. The breaking is symbolic of Elendil not being patient and the consequences. And then Katie says yes, and we see pity towards Kemen. Then Kemen spitting on that by stabbing Valandil in the back and then washing it in the waters, as if washing it with her tears of grief and pity. Well, I just want to say, Beric and Katie, between you two, you have both perfectly managed to draw kind of allegories and fresh kind of perspectives on Nienna's dual ideas of patience and pity. So thank you for both that.
I
We
also
also,
thought it was
oh, sorry.
sorry. I also thought it was quite good because I really get that point about kind of washing that off with her tears. But it almost felt kind of like disrespect from Kemen as well because he's just killed a member of the faithful with this blade and he goes straight ahead and just dips it into this water that their candles were like drifting off on. You know, it's that it's not even the disrespect, but it's just the blatant disregard for their beliefs. You know, he doesn't even think twice about it. And he's kind of just
Well,
disregard for Valandil as a person as well.
yeah, I think the fact that everyone else they were honouring had this candle set out on the tide, but of course there will be no candle for Valandil. All there is his blood disappearing into the waters
Is that
around
right?
Númenor. Um,
Sorry.
thank you, Anna. But we'll get to that shot in a second because I do also just want to address this really quite funny moment that when after Elendil punches Kemen and Kemen goes, hold him. Kemen then, I still don't really know what Kemen was doing. I think what he was doing was like, if you're a boxer, when you're like lining up a punch, you'll like jab to measure range. So you'll like if you're right-handed, you'll extend your left hand to measure the range to someone's chin. And I like that Kemen's version of that was to like stroke Elendil's beard on the chin. It was just like a really
We've all
weird.
wanted to do it.
I had a feeling you would say that before I could even finish the sentence. But yeah, no, I mean, I saw a lot of people saying they weren't sure whether they wanted to be Elendil or be Kemen in this scene. I mean, I don't think anyone wants to be touched by Kemen. I mean, maybe some people do want to be touched by Kemen. Anyway,
Can't say I'm
so
one
that
of them. Sorry, one more thing that I wanted to say before we move on from Valandil. I know we've talked about him for a while, but Chris makes a really good point that I bet Isildur's going to be mad that he saved Kemen and kept his secret. And I think that that's a really interesting point because it goes back to Tolkien's idea about kind of pity. Do you do you have the power to take someone's life or spare someone's life? And you know it manifests for different characters in different ways. You know, we know in the Lord of the Rings, Gandalf tells Frodo to spare Gollum because he thinks that he's going to have a role to play down the line. We saw Isildur save Kemen in season 1, and at the time that appeared to have, you know, good consequences for Isildur. But then Valandil makes that same choice. You know, he almost doesn't, but Elendil's almost that voice of reason to say, no, son, don't do it. And it's Valandil's pity then that is the reason that he dies. So it's that really interesting debate on when do you spare a life and when do you take a life.
it is, isn't it? It's so good that we have this
Yeah.
constant, and especially for Isildur. And if you think about Isildur's role in the story, especially of the One Ring, Isildur and Gollum being inherently linked by stories of, you know, making wrong decisions, but also of characters showing pity towards them or not. And so, like you say, having Isildur's pity towards Kemen in saving him, and also as we've seen again this season, Isildur's pity towards Estrid, you know, in terms of forgiving her and realizing that, you know, not everyone deserves a second chance. I think Isildur kind of being this embodiment of someone who will accept pity no matter the consequences is
Yeah.
really quite lovely. I did also just want to address someone in the comments, which is David Roberts, who said, first time to catch you guys live. I'm in Australia, so the time zones don't usually work out. I've really enjoyed your super long form contents in season 1. Keep up the good work. Well, thank you so much, David. And lovely to have, I think Lavender as well is here from Australia, so lovely to have a couple of our Antipodean cousins join us on the live stream. Might have taught you all a new word there for people from Australia. But
I
I
like
did
that
also,
we go on for so long that we just kind of breach time zones, you know.
yeah.
There's nowhere that can't catch us.
No, exactly. You could be anywhere in the world, and you could probably wake up at some point, and we'll still be talking. But I did also want to address just this last thing that Valandil says before before fighting Kemen, which is where, Kemen says, "I don't see you praying." And the last real line of dialogue we get Valandil. Obviously, he says one more thing to Elendil before he dies, but he says, "May the Valar forgive me." And obviously, it's set up so that Kemen can go, "Forgive what?" And then he just throws him to the ground. And so in a way, it's a bit of like a kind of comedic one-liner. But really, I think for Valandil, it tells us a lot about his character and his idea of faith, that he knows that what he's about to do might be wrong and might be a mistake, but he cannot stand another insult to the memory of the dead who they're honoring, to the Valar, to Míriel, the conversation that kept coming up in season one and was, I guess, typified by Isildur and Galadriel on the ship to Middle-earth, when Isildur talks about the true Númenor, and then he says, "If it ever existed." And Galadriel says, "It did exist. It still exists now, even if it's in the heart of one lonely stable sweep." And so I love the idea that Valandil, Isildur's best friend, is almost keeping alive this idea of the true Númenor just in his heart alone. And so him still asking the Valar for forgiveness, obviously it's tragic that Valandil dies in this scene, but there's something very beautiful about the fact that the last meaningful thing he does before his death is ask the Valar for forgiveness. And I just really, really love that.
It's great, and I mean, I think it's as you said, this scene was like a sucker punch, and I never expected Valandil to die. And I think the one thing that one of the things that the Rings of Power did really well in season one was set up these kind of side characters as support to the main cast, but as also a kind of support to the themes that they wanted to bring in to the show. And I'm not going to lie and say that I cared about everyone. When Ontamo died, I almost cheered because I put a bet on with you and said that he would die. So I was just kind of like, okay, he's gone. But this one really, like, it really got me. Like, I shed a tear for Valandil. I think he was a really great supporting character, and I think Alex Tarrant did a really, really good job with him. So it's sad that we don't have him anymore going forward. But look, he got his moment humbling Kemen, and he looks great with the sword. So there we go.
I thought the fight scene was choreographed very well. I mean, the attempted drowning, Valandil breaking Kemen's arm. I mean, that was really good, visceral, very scrappy fighting, which is what I always love to see in a fight scene. I don't like it where it looks too kind of choreographed and too clean, and that was sufficiently kind of rough and ready. But I also loved, and I don't have the shot here to show now, but I loved when Elendil tells him to put the sword down. We get that brief shot of Valandil, and his eyes have gone kind of crazy. They're wide with fury and rage. And I think, again, that goes back to what you were speaking about, that this idea of like, who is allowed to take a life and who has the right to. And in that moment, Valandil almost crosses the line, but the important point he doesn't. And that's what separates him and Kemen, is that Valandil recognizes that he doesn't have the right to mete out justice like this, no matter how righteous he feels. And yes, that is his downfall, but I almost think there's something very Tolkienian about the idea of a character dying without surrendering that part of themselves, dying in defense of that value and of that belief. So yeah, it was just, and I mean, obviously I could talk about the fact that Elendil calls him son, and I know he's using son in terms of the, like, young man, someone who is junior to me, but
they did
just
it on purpose.
I know, I mean, just the idea that Elendil has lost his biological son, and now he's lost this other figure who is like a son to, we know that Valandil and Isildur have been friends since childhood. So, I mean, just having that, having Elendil's last words to Valandil be son, and having Valandil's last words to him back being "I, Captain," this relationship ends as it began, but it's so beautifully tragic in that way.
It's like, it's crazy as well, because Elendil, thinks Isildur is dead, but he doesn't get to be with him when he's dying, and it's almost like he's going through that with Valandil instead. And I think from that perspective, it's like almost the kind of the youth and the light and the innocence of Númenor is gone now. Eärien and Kemen are down this path with Pharazôn, Isildur, Ontimo, and Valandil are all presumed dead. It's like the kind of youthfulness and the joy and the innocence that we saw in season one. That this is it. The kind of that light's been snuffed out.
Exactly, exactly. So we'll last couple of thoughts on this. I mean, I just wanted to address. I thought it was very funny. The last thing we got of Kevin when he was lying on the ground was him whimpering, and the subtitles even helpfully say whimpers, because he is pathetic.
We got that. That's one thing that took me out of this is that as Valandil was dying, the subtitles very nicely go Elendil whimpering.
Well, he was
It's like,
whimpering.
listen, all I'm going to say is when I saw those subtitles, I was like, okay, different context than I assumed, but there we go.
Would you like to expand your thoughts on that, Anna?
I would not.
You would not. Okay, the last thing I want to say is that I just thought the way this last shot was framed of Kemen washing his sword away, and I saw, we obviously talked about the way other people have interpreted this. I also thought of it in quite a biblical sense, this idea of washing one's sins away. And I think this is Kemen, is this idea of wanting to wash the blood off his hands. He's ashamed of what he's done. He's going to play it off like, this is what he meant to do and he was right to do it. But I think the truth is that he knows that he's messed up and he knows that he's done wrong. And so the fact that his immediate reaction is to go and try and wash the blood off the sword, I think is so telling. But I mean, just this whole shot of Elendil cradling Valandil's body in the background, Kemen washing the blood off the sword. I mean, I've seen other people say it, but it genuinely looks like a painting.
It's a lot of visual storytelling that they do. He's wiping the blood off the sword, so he might be able to get that away. But his dead body's in the background. It's that thing of you can try and get rid of the evidence, but you're never gonna be able to escape what you've done.
Exactly. Just going on to a few comments. Rose-colored shade says, my controversial take is that I actually really like the pacing of this season and how events are unfolding, given that they are trying to cover in 8 episodes in 5 seasons. I mean, that's a fair point as well. And like I said, I think the pacing's working very well for a lot of people. It clearly is based on conversations I'm having with people who aren't, inside the fandom or, book readers. So I think it works well. See, Higgy says, I don't know, I thought he looked pretty smug while he was dipping the sword. And Chris says, oh, interesting, I interpreted it as an act of callousness on his part, like, ooh, I got blood on my sword. Yeah, I mean, I think it is open to interpretation. I think you can definitely see it, as we talked about earlier, as disrespectful to the faithful in terms of their ceremony, or as you guys are saying here, callousness in terms of not honouring Valandil's death. I think for me, I just see Kemen as such a kind of, he is a pitiful creature, and so I saw this very much as him trying to wash away the blood on his hands, in a metaphorical sense. But I think it's open to interpretation. Anna, anything else you want to say on Númenor before we move on after, a good hour of talking about Númenor?
I don't think so. The only thing that I want to say is that we finally, next episode, get what I've been looking forward to for over a year now, which is Elendil in Chains. Elendil
in Chains. And I've seen that there's been a scene released from tomorrow's episode. And for those of you, I'm not going to spoil it because obviously I know lots of people like to go in without watching the preview scenes, but it's a scene involving Elendil. And can I just say, that is another scene that I had a leaked description of, and again, it's word for word what I thought it was going to be. So, not that anyone needs to congratulate me, but once again, I'm just very proud of myself for having restraint.
There you go, another round of applause. But yeah,
Thanks.
Númenor is just...
It's getting going.
Everything I love about this show is in this plot line. It's getting going, we're here, and I'm glad that it's finally getting its screen time. I just hope that they've kind of realised now that it needs it. I'm scared that we're going to get this, and then it's going to be like, okay, bye. But I think we're going to kind of the trials, the chains, everything next episode. So I'm very excited.
Yeah, and I just wanted to leave us, for those of you who are watching the YouTube live stream, I just wanted to leave it on this picture of Isildur, Valandil, and Ontimo from season 1, episode 6, because there may only be one of them left, but I think this is how this is how we should remember them. We should remember them as three friends who survived their first battle in war together. And while Ontimo may have seen enough war for a lifetime, and while Valandil may still have wanted the Valar to forgive him, we can hope that wherever men's souls go after they die, they will meet together in that green land under a swift sunrise. So, a hopeful thought for these three.
Yeah, I'm sorry for cheering your death on Ontimo. I didn't mean it.
Yeah, Anna did it just so she could win. I mean, I admittedly, I bet Valandil was going to die in that episode, so I'm hardly free of guilt. I guess I was just lucky that I was wrong. I also,
Yeah, I was Team Valandil for the long run.
yeah, I do also just want to address something that I have seen on Twitter over the last week, which is I think some people saying like, was Valandil's death rushed? Should he have been on the show longer? And like, don't get me wrong, I loved Valandil. I could have watched him for 5 seasons. But fundamentally, like, this is what you have to do in a show. Like, I always say that the reason a lot of people can't be good writers is because they can't do that fundamental thing which all good writers talk about, which is you have to be able to kill your darlings. And
Yeah.
Valandil is one of those darlings. Like, he is this lovely character who symbolizes everything that is good about Númenor and everything that was good in Isildur's life. And you have to make the stakes feel worth it. And when you're telling a story which has so many canon characters who we know exactly when they're going to die or if they're going to die during these 5 seasons, this is what the side characters are there for. And so I totally appreciate people being sad that Valandil's gone. Listen, I'm sad he's gone. I wish we got him for more episodes, more seasons. But I do think it was a meaningful death. I don't think it was cheap. I don't think it was just for shock value. I don't think it was disrespectful to Valandil's character. I go back to that thing of him asking the Valar forgiveness. Like, he died standing for what was important to him, and I think that's all we could hope for any character.
I agree. I mean, I think in a show like this, you need characters that don't have plot armor, you know. As you said, it's what the side characters are for, and I think it really calls to how well they've established the side characters that we do feel this grief when they're kind of killed off, because these aren't established Tolkien characters that we've known about already. These are characters that we've only come to love over the course of season 1, half of season 2, and as much as it sucks, you know, that's what they're here for, and Valandil's served his purpose, and I like to think that the Valar have forgiven him.
Yeah, and I think obviously. And I think also those of us, you know, like, this isn't really a major spoiler, so I feel fine talking about it, but obviously Valandil in Tolkien's own writings is the name that Isildur gives to his oldest son. So I think we were inevitably going to need to have Valandil dead by the time Isildur has his first son, because, you know, it's a name you... Yeah, there's no baby Ontimo, I'm afraid. But I think we were always going to have Valandil die sooner rather than later in order to have Isildur's naming of his child means, you know, it wasn't just going to be like, oh, you're named after my best friend who is still very much here, and like, you're named after my good friend, and it's going to be really confusing when we start calling people Valandil. But, you know, Beric says, I'll agree to disagree here. I think it was a meaningful death, but he could have also had one later. I mean, Beric, I don't disagree with you that he could have, but I guess what I'm saying is I disagree that it was too soon or that it was unjustifiably soon. Like, I think my complaint about it would be that, like all of Númenor's story this season, we could have done with more scenes leading up to this point. But I think him dying at the point he did, like, it made narrative sense to me. But I also agree with you, Beric, where you say, I want everyone who theorized he was going to be a Witch King to apologize. Yeah, no, that was always the stupidest theory. Yeah, I never liked that. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, Quirky Joe, the one thing I want to add on to says, is Arondir going to get crushed by Damrod? And I don't know if this is going to make sense, but I think that there's like a difference in the Rings of Power between the side characters that we have and the non-canon main characters.
100%.
You know, so the people I'd consider like the side characters, you know, like Valandil, Kemen, Eardian, they seem to be kind of in Númenor mostly, but you have the main characters then that are like Arondir and Disa. And it might just be wishful thinking, but I feel like they know that they've got they've got the audience with those characters. You know, they're already fan favorites, and I like to think that they've made them so integral to the story now that that we're gonna get them for at least a few seasons time.
Oh, 100%. I mean, Elendil was like one of the five like most prominent characters in season one. Like, I don't think in any
Yeah.
way, like, I even think Eärien and Kemen will be around for a long time, but Elendil is definitely. Listen, I wouldn't be shocked if he survives all the way through to the end of season five. I think he might have a tragic death at the end of season five, but he's going to get to season five. Anyway, let's move on now. So we're going to cover kind of Khazad-dûm and Eregion pretty much side by side because obviously their stories interlace throughout this episode. But we'll cover the opening to Khazad-dûm's storyline first because that is very much its own separate thing. And so obviously where we actually opened the episode was with what I thought was a beautiful transition where we were going across the Misty Mountains and then the peak of the mountain transformed
Yeah.
into King Durin's ring and then we saw the rest of the rings and then Durin putting them on. And then we got kind of this extended sequence of King Durin going to the delve shafts where Na'vi and Prince Durin were helping the digging crews, try and break through to the surface to bring light back into Khazad-dûm. And I just thought this was such a wonderful representation because obviously we don't get given a lot of information about what the rings do for the dwarves. Obviously, we know it caused them to dig deeper, to be more greedy, to be more possessive about the wealth under their mountains. But I loved this idea they explored throughout this episode, but in particular, obviously at the start of the episode, that for King Durin, having this ring allows his connection to the mountain to become not something that is just spiritual or kind of metaphorical. It is a literal connection the ring allows him to have. And so I thought that was a really nice way to, kind of go back to Círdan's scene in episode 2 where he talked about the three elven rings, where he said, these rings have immense power and they could do good things in the right hands. And so I liked that we didn't start, like, if this episode had started with King Durin being like, let's mine more gold, let's dig more, let's, don't worry about the sunlight, let's just get rich. It was really nice to actually have the episode start with King Durin using it to kind of restore his people. Oh god, Anne's just got back just as we finished our Valandil morning. I mean, it's probably for the best, Anne, because, we didn't want to upset you, so, probably for the best. But we've moved on to Khazad-dûm. But yeah, Anna, your thoughts on this kind of opening sequence with Durin taking the ring, bringing light back into Khazad-dûm, the kingdom being restored to its height, I guess.
I love it. I mean, the first shot, as you said, that kind of transition from the mountain to the ring, and it's almost that thing of kind of this starting to take over. And I loved the way that it sort of mirrored the light returning to Linden in the Golden Leaves scene. But we know now that these rings have like far more influence from Sauron in them. We got, was it the end? I think it was either the end of episode 3 or 4, and we got that kind of visual moment of Sauron kind of holding his hand out for the mithril, and you see that physical effect he has on the dwarven rings. So I like that this almost mirrors the Golden Leaves scene, but it just has that slightly more unsettling tone, and we're almost watching it from Prince Durin's perspective. And I like because I know we saw in the trailers, we know at some point that Elrond is going to go and kind of appeal to Prince Durin for help. I like that Prince Durin almost had the same role that Elrond had when he was watching the elves put their rings on. He was kind of watching from afar. He knew something wasn't right about it, but there's nothing he could really do to stop it. Prince Durin was sort of in the same shoes, so I like that they're going to eventually come together over that, and that's what they're going to kind of ally over. It was so good, and then even the kind of speech that he gives afterwards, when he's talking to his people, he says, "Pity those who dwell above, slaves to the sun, chained to its ceaseless rhythm of waking and sleep. In Khazad-dûm we are free of its tyranny. Here we bring the sun to us. At last it is daybreak once more in our mountain." So
So
it's
good.
technically like it's this light that he's brought back to the mountain, but there's this greed already laced within his speech. He's saying, "Pity everyone else. We've got the light back. This is ours. This is our mountain." And it's just the way that you can feel it, even in this kind of moment of victory for them, and you really feel why Durin and Disa are just like something's not right here, you know?
It's the thing I liked about it was that I think, and we'll get onto this later when the younger Doran comes to Eregion to talk to Celebrimbor. I liked that they've slightly, not completely, but they've slightly moved away from Tolkien's idea of the dwarves just being inherently greedy. It's this,
Yes.
instead they've almost used the rings to talk about the rings, bringing out this really negative side of the dwarves, but it's not inherent to them. Or,
Yeah,
if
he
I,
says something along the lines of like, he's never been like this, you know, it's never been about this for him.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think having this first scene before we get into when King Doran starts kind of delving more greedily and more deeply, and we get that conversation with Navi, I think that it was really important to establish that King Doran isn't a bad king fundamentally. Like, fundamentally, he wants to protect his people. He wants them to have light in their kingdom. He wants them to grow and to be prosperous. And at first, that's what the ring allows him to do. And, we often talk about Sauron's key thing being that he doesn't tempt people with some horrible vision of the future. He tempts them with what they want, and then it is the kind of poison pill that is slipped in with it that is really what undoes his victims of manipulations. And so even the way that scene was framed, with the light cascading back off the mirrors, him giving this triumphant speech, the crowd roaring back at him, and his son being among the crowd, looking proudly at his father. I
Yeah.
thought that was really important because what we don't want to, and we've talked about this before about getting the audience invested, we just don't want the audience to see King Doran and think, well, he's always just been this greedy, horrible character. Like, we want to see these positive virtues and qualities to him so that when the ring starts making him worse and worse, it is a noticeable difference. It is not just, oh, there's King Doran, he was always greedy and horrible, who cares?
Yeah, exactly that. And I think Marco and Rose Colored Shades have already said, you know, Peter Mullen is doing an incredible job as him so far. I mean, and I mean this in the nicest way possible, just because there were so many standouts in season one, but he didn't stand out to me in season one. I thought he was good, but it was never a performance where I was like, you know, this is the one. But this season, you know, it's as Rose Colored Shades says, he's going kind of straight up tragic Shakespearean king. And you know, we talked about this, I think, when we got some scene descriptions from Khazad-dûm. It's this downfall, as you say. You know, it's even the little things like where he says, you know, we're gonna go deeper, we're gonna get more, and he's like, who put these restrictions here in the first place? And Navi's very clear. He's like, it was you, because there was a time when he cared about that. He cared about safety. You know, he doesn't let them kind of delve for Mithril in season one because of that. And it's like it's like this kind of 180 now, and as you say, it's not come out of nowhere.
Yeah, and I think as Rose-colored shades also says, Deesa's reaction to the speech is so telling. She starts being concerned because she realizes it shouldn't be this easy, and we kind of get a reference to this later, and this comes way towards the end of the episode when King Doran is talking to his son, and he says, the stone singers, they speak of being able to hear the mountain, but I can see it, and so it's this idea that the ring has given him this gift, which isn't inherently bad, but it has that quality of the elves trying to cheat their fate, of men trying to cheat death, of dwarves seeking to have not just their kingdom in the mountain, but ownership of everything inside it, and to
Yeah.
have, and as Beric says here, this is something I was going to bring, and Higgy's saying the same thing as well, and we talked about this when we were prepping for this episode, is that scene with Navi where he says, where's the ring on, and then, Navi says, you took it off. He said it felt heavier on your hand, and then he almost comes out. He said, I did say it was heavy.
What I like in that scene, and listen, it might not have been intentional, but it's as you touched on before. You know, he says that he now has this ability to see the mountain, and kind of see the mountain, hear the mountain, whatever. And then you have this moment where he's lost the ring. He's trying to talk to Navi, and Navi's trying to talk to him, and he's saying, it's right there, you took it off, it's fine. But he's not listening, and he's not seeing the person who's right in front of him. And I think that that's a really interesting thing in kind of in this like blind panic. He's kind of blind to the people who are right there.
And it's I think the interesting thing about, and as you said, about him almost forgetting that he was the one who placed the restrictions on how deeply they could delve and how far they could mine. And I even loved the way how he compared the mountain to an ocean. Now, I think I've got the quote here of what exactly he said, but he said, in in thousands of years, we have barely taken a thimble from the ocean of her riches. And it is, as Beric saying in the chat, it is so similar to Númenor's story. It is the grasp exceeding the reach. It is this idea that because something is there and we can see it in the same way Pharazôn can see Tol Eressëa and thinks that the might and the gifts of the Valar and the elves should be given to him, because Durin can now see every jewel and every precious thing beneath the mountain, he now thinks he should be able to own it and to have it. And it's just, like I said earlier, I really appreciate that it's not even really a retcon or a major change from Tolkien's writings, but it's just adding a little more nuance to the dwarves and not having them be these kind of inherently greedy or, something being wrong with them as a race. It might be a quality they have. Sorry.
It's as we said before, Durin is very clear to Celebrimbor that this is because of the rings, It may have been deep down in my father before, but he was never greedy, he was never selfish, he was never, cruel. I like that because it's like even in season 1, they butted heads and, it ends with kind of Prince Durin not being Prince Durin anymore. But there were a lot of things in season 1 where you're like, okay, I might not agree with King Durin, but you can see the reasoning and you can see the rationale behind his decisions. And then it's like now there's none of that left.
I just wanted to address 2 comments. One, Sarah on the Dark Lord says, I got to go to sleep, but wanted to thank Harry and Anna for making the stream a lovely little pre-episode ritual. Oh, thank you. Listen, I am actually really glad you say that, because I think both Aaron and I probably feel a little bit guilty that, last year we used to record these really planned and methodical and detailed episodes, and then I would release them on the podcast, and this year I've been going through a bit of a meltdown, and so I don't think I've even uploaded the audio from last week's stream, which I'm really sorry about. I had another really crazy week.
It's okay, Harry, we've been melting down together.
Thank you. I mean, you've been on holiday, so I'm not sure I quite agree. But no, I'm glad people still enjoy these live streams, and I do hope they're enjoyable. But I also wanted to address, I think Jess,
that's maybe what we worry about a little bit, just that we kind of come on here and yap for a bit, but it's not quite as would I say intelligent? Maybe not quite as thought out as last year's discussions. But
I mean, Anna's enjoying
fun, and I like the interactive nature of the live streams.
Yeah, and I think you probably enjoy it a little more because it's not just me reading out quotes from the Silmarillion for 3 hours, showing off that I can read books.
I love that.
Oh yeah, no, I know. But I also wanted to raise, I think Jessica made a really good analogy, which I know is something that's talked about before, but I think Jessica puts it very nicely here, where she says it's reminiscent of descriptions of addiction, can't be fully present if not under the influence, but part of your brain is always thinking about that. And I really like that, because I'm not someone who's, I don't in any way mean to suggest that I'm someone who's, because I don't want to make light of anyone who has, I'm not someone who's ever suffered with a seriously debilitating addiction, but I am someone who is very aware that I'm very prone to kind of addictive personality traits, and so it's always something I've been aware of when it's come to alcohol or substances, is that I've always, in the 30 years of being alive, I've always been very aware of that, because I know that I'm someone who could be very susceptible to it. So when you see in this show what the ring does to people, whether it's Bilbo in The Lord of the Rings, or whether it's Durin here, or we're eventually going to see with the 9 Rings for Men, I do really like this idea of the rings being like a fix that you can't ever stop getting. It is the ultimate power trip, but it is also,
and it's like that.
Sorry
to interrupt, but it's like that. It's as you say. It's everlasting. Once it's there, it never truly leaves. And I think Frodo says something to that effect. And one of the scenes that always makes me kind of the saddest in the Lord of the Rings trilogy is when Bilbo and Frodo are kind of on their way to the Grey Havens, and he just says, he's kind of thingied against Frodo. All the fight's gone out of him. He's tired. He just wants to sail west, but he still asks if he can just hold the ring one more time. That feeling, it never truly goes away.
I love that. Thank you for that, Anna, because I love that comparison. And I think obviously we'll maybe talk about it a little bit later once we've gone through some of the Eregion stuff. But I did think it was really interesting that we ended the dwarvish storyline in this episode with Disa asking Durin to promise to swear to her that he would never wear a ring, because it's like you say, it's not a like, oh, maybe I can wear this ring and then I'll be okay if I take it off. It's like
Yeah.
it is the first domino falling, and no matter how much you try and claw them back, you can't change it. Um, but yeah, so let's go to Eregion now. We'll return to some of the other scenes in Khazad-dûm as we go through. But I want to go to Eregion, and I realize some people will have been like, Harry, I can't believe you didn't start with Eregion, given that it's Celebrimbor, and this is probably the reason why you love this episode so much, which is true. It is the reason I love this episode so much. I do actually just want to start with a small negative, because then everything else I say about Eregion is going to be positive.
Yeah.
But I
I've got
think
my
you're
one
going to,
negative as well.
you might be on the same page as me here. But when we heard that Na'vi was going to be cast in the Rings of Power, and when we therefore assumed that we were going to see the creation of the Doors of Durin, and then in episode 1 when we got the beautiful tease of the Ithildin, the moon runes being made, you were like, oh, I'm so glad we're going to see Na'vi and Celebrimbor being friends, making the doors together. We're going to see him showing Na'vi Ithildin and how it can be worked into the doors. I'm not gonna lie. I am so disappointed that maybe we'll get more. I don't know, but I am so disappointed that as of episode 5, the one scene we've got is this admittedly very charming scene of Celebrimbor and Na'vi standing together and celebrating this union between the dwarves and the elves, and Na'vi unveiling the doors of Durin. But it's not been earned, and it's not even that it hasn't been earned. It's just that I want to see more. I don't understand, like, and this is where I get pissed off about the rune stuff. Like, I don't get me wrong, I've said this 1,000 times. I love the Harfoot storyline. I really do. I love Nori. I love the Stranger. I love Poppy. I've even weirdly loved Tom Bombadil. But, like, you can't expect me to get to episode 5 of season 2 of The Rings of Power and Celebrimbor and Na'vi to have one scene where they barely interact, were barely shown any signs of their friendship beyond a bit of gentle teasing between each other. And it's just like, this is where the showrunners frustrate me sometimes, because I'm like, you have so little source material to work with. You, like, I have so much sympathy for them because Tolkien wrote so little about the Second Age. But one thing we know for a fact, let me say that again, for a fact, is that Celebrimbor, the elves of Eregion, and the dwarves of Khazad-dûm had a fast friendship, and that Celebrimbor and Na'vi made the doors together. And it just, I feel so, like, I could swear, I feel so shortchanged by this. I'm actually
Yeah.
upset about this.
That was my big negative as well. And it's like, as you say, like, we might see more going on. This might be the start of their relationship. But the thing about Na'vi and Celebrimbor, and things that are, I think, are integral to their characters, is the fact that they are craftsmen. They excel at their crafts. It's what they love, and it's what they have in common with each other. So their relationship is built as they are building the doors of Durin. That's when it starts. And it almost feels like, the doors of Durin, and it's not just because they're in the Jackson films, but they're such an integral feature in Tolkien lore. Tolkien himself drew them. It's such an integral piece of the lore, and it feels like they kind of just shoved it in to check a box off. They were like, okay, we've got Celebrimbor here, we've got Na'vi here. They built the doors of Durin, so here they are. You can kind of move on now. And it was like, I almost wish they didn't have that little moment of banter between them where Celebrimbor's like, Na'vi's a great craftsman and he's almost a thief, because it was so charming that it made me mad, because I was like, this is what we could have had. And I think it would have played really well off of the relationship between Celebrimbor and Anatar as well, because they have this sort of thing in common as well, where they're both craftsmen, they both have this goal in common, they want to make rings together. But that's an unhealthy relationship. We know that Anatar is manipulating him the whole time. So if you gave us something to juxtapose that with this really nice bond that he has with Na'vi, and this creation of something as beautiful as the doors, why, and you have the rights to it. Why would you not give us that? But we get like like a 20-minute scene of Nori and Poppy and the stranger playing a guessing game about what his name is, you know?
It,
It's
it,
just,
it
it's stuff
makes
like that. I'm just like, come on.
it makes me so mad. Like, and I appreciate that a lot of people like. I've even seen like people who are not book readers say like, oh, they love all the Half-Wit storyline, and I'm really happy with them. That, and I'm really glad people enjoy it, and I enjoy it. Like, I hate when people misinterpret me and say, well, people go, well, I enjoy the Half-Wit stuff. I enjoy the Half-Wit stuff. How many times do I have to say it? I enjoy it. But that doesn't mean that I want like my major canon characters to be reduced in their screen time, because I just want to address a couple of the comments. Halbrand's Pouch says, also, just to be sure, we aren't supposed to see the carvings on the door, right? They're only visible under moonlight. And it also said we saw them outside under the moonlight. You know, wish we saw them outside under moonlight. And I know Beric and Higgy have gone back about for this. Yeah, the Ithildin hasn't been placed in them yet, because we see that actually the grooves are still there, and that will be filled in with the Ithildin. Because for those of you who've read Fellowship of the Rings, the doors appear like a flat surface. So the reason we can see the grooves is because the Ithildin haven't been filled in, and we and sorry, and there was a shot. It wasn't in a trailer, but it was like a promotional shot where we saw Celebrimbor filling in these grooves with the Ithildin, and Anatar's standing in the background. And that just like that scene just hasn't made it into the show apparently, and it's just like it's so annoying. Like it's really like fuck. It really bothers me. And I can't remember. I saw someone. Sorry, just a second.
No, I
Like,
think you're. Sorry, yeah.
can I just like add up? Because I know you mentioned this, but like someone, and I've lost the comment already, so I apologize who said it, but someone said it would have been a nice balance. Oh, sorry, it was Katie who said this should have been a good foil to his relationship and dynamic with Anatar. And like, Anna, you know that me and you talked about this when we first got our first shot of Na'vi in the promotional. We said that like the genius of including Na'vi in this story is that you get to have Celebrimbor with an angel on one shoulder and a devil on the other, and that having like these one figure who's a craftsman who is pulling him in a positive direction, and one figure who is, you know, obviously appears as an angel but is actually a devil pulling him in a negative direction. Like that would have made for such compelling viewing, and it just bothers me to no end that they just missed the opportunity.
I agree, and I think Katie makes a really good point about the fact that we don't see this build up between Celebrimbor and Navi's relationship. You know, we know that they must have built the doors together, but as far as we're concerned, this is the first time we're seeing them interact. So you have this banter between them where Celebrimbor makes the comment about Navi being a thief, but as Katie says, do we just accept that it's this non sequitur of banter, because without it, it just comes across as very stereotypical, and it's like we don't get this build up to their relationship, so you can't take this as just like, oh, it's like this kind of charming banter between friends, because we've never seen them on screen before together, so we don't have that kind of dynamic between them where we maybe have it with like Durin, other characters like that. It's just you can't throw them in there like that and just expect everyone to be like, oh, you know, it's Navi and Celebrimbor, they're best friends. It's like that thing we talked about where it being for kind of more casual viewers. A lot of them aren't going to know who Navi is. They'll know the Doors of Durin from the Fellowship of the Ring, but this scene is just so inconsequential when it's really such a big part of kind of the history of Middle Earth.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, like I said, this is my one negative about the storyline, so I don't want to prolong it too long. But I think Beric sums it up nicely here, where he says, you know, it feels like a fan service Easter egg. Like that's exactly what it felt like when Na'vi said, "Behold, the doors of Durin," and it was like, yeah, I know what they are. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, but it's like like I didn't have a I didn't go, like I did watch some YouTube reactions, and like some people who've only seen the Peter Jackson films went, ooh, so like maybe it's nice for them, but for me I'm just like, you know what it's like? It's like with the Gandalf stuff, where like every time they make a pun about Gandalf's name, I'm like, I get it, I get it, I get it. He's Gandalf, I get it, I get it. Stop doing a pun about it. I get it. Like, you know, stop doing this. And it was weirdly like that, where I was like, I don't need to be, I don't need to be kind of like babied like this and be like, see, here's the doors of Dorian for you, because you've seen the Peter Jackson films and you know these are the doors that glow outside more. It's like, no, shut up. Like, you had an opportunity to do something interesting with Celebrimbor and Navi's friendship, and you just decided not to do it. And like, I really don't want people to be like, oh, adaptations have to make this cut. Like, guys, you are talking to the person who has spent 2 years and a season and a half, like 50 podcast episodes, talking about like why it's okay to make changes. But like, you're not going to convince me that this is like a good thing to do. You're just
It
not.
it just makes me question why they included Navi in the first place because
Yeah.
I get that they're using him as the king's advisor, but you could have used any dwarf for that. The thing about Navi is his relationship with Celebrimbor and the creation of the doors. So it's like if you're gonna focus on his relationship with King Durin and just kind of breeze past him and Celebrimbor, why include him in the first place?
Yeah, yeah. Anyway, we're not going to spend any more time ranting about it because we've made our feelings clear. I do want to say, like,
Yeah.
I've seen people say that like it came across as like an anti-Semitic comment, like the whole jewel thief thing. I mean, I'm not going to wade into this debate because, like, I just feel like it's a much deeper conversation to be having about Tolkien's depiction of dwarves. I'll just say, like, I don't think within the context of the show, it's read like that. And I think it's quite. I'm just going to say I think it is quite disingenuous and unfair to say that about the writers of the show, that like this was thrown in there and like it was like, anyway. No, I'm not going to get into it because I realize it is a much more like serious debate about Tolkien's depiction of the dwarves, which like we don't have time for today. But I'll just say, like, I think it's a bit much when people say that like it's an anti-Semitic comment. Like, I think it's a lazy casual joke they've thrown in there. And yes, obviously with the context of how Tolkien portrayed the dwarves, you can interpret it that way. But I just think like it's a little bit like, I don't like when people go from interpreting what they're seeing on screen to like bringing in a whole separate issue and debate, which you can totally have about Tolkien's text, but which I just don't think is like present in the show. And I think if anything, the show has very much moved away from that, in terms of, as we were talking earlier about their depiction of the dwarves and their greed. But anyway, I'm not gonna. I don't want to get into a debate with people because I totally respect that people have different opinions on that. Let's talk about let's talk about all the stuff I loved about it. And the things I loved about it are, of course, this domestic relationship between these two, which, listen, put my usual caveat out there. The queer reading of Celebrimbor and Anatar's relationship is 90% done by fans. There is very little that obviously Tolkien writes himself that is like read intentionally or written intentionally to have that queer context. However, and the other caveat I'm always going to put in there is that no, the multi-billion-dollar show made by Amazon is never going to take the risks that we would like it to take. Um, but I'll just say this: never have Celebrimbor and Anatar more seemed like a married couple than throughout this episode. The bickering, the touching on the arms, the "you don't always listen to me. I told you to keep it short, did you?" This whole like back and forth, how close they were standing to each other, the way they were looking at each other, the way Celebrimbor keeps touching him to try and, reassure him. Like, I totally appreciate that for 90% of people, they're not going to read it that way. And I totally appreciate the show is not even really making an effort to put any sort of queer subtext around it. However, allow me my little lovely moment of having said this was an episode where I was like, I've never felt more like Celebrimbor and Anatar are like this, horribly toxic,
Yeah.
like married for centuries. And I thought, and we'll get into more of the specific scenes within it, but right from this first moment, like Anatar choosing to walk off the moment where Celebrimbor starts praising Navi, I was like, oh, he's such a petty little guy that he can't even accept that Celebrimbor's, centering Navi in this and not him. And so I want to start there by saying that like I totally appreciate the show isn't giving me anything here, but I absolutely loved what I did get.
I'm with you, and it makes me laugh that there's kind of like my whole timeline's been divided in two over this episode, and one of them is obviously, as you've said, him and Celebrimbor bickering like a married couple, and then the other side was, oh my god, he touched Merdania's hair and said she reminds him of Galadriel, so clearly she's all he's thinking about. And there's no in between that I've seen, which makes me kind of laugh. But I agree. I think I said it at the start. Charlie Vickers and Charles Edwards, whatever people thought about their casting at first, I feel like any doubts I can imagine they've dispelled, because oh my gosh, like both of them in isolation are just wonderful, but they play off each other so well. There's this like, someone made a really good thread about it yesterday. Like Charlie's Anatar is he's almost a little bit pathetic, walking off when someone else is being praised. He's clearly trying his best to have these rings being made, but at the same time there's just something really scary about him. Like you can always just see something kind of bubbling under the surface. And then Charles as Celebrimbor, I love that they've given him this like fire, this backbone. He outright refuses to make the 9 rings for the men. He's not just going to kind of sit there and let Anatar run around in his forge and do whatever he wants. And that relationship, the way that they're kind of almost butting heads and they're kind of doing this dance back and forth, it's just so interesting to see it play out. It's almost tragic because, that there's not a happy ending to this story, and almost like every shot we get of Celebrimbor, like this moment where he has his head in his hands and he's just kind of scraping his hands over his face, and you're just like, I hate you for doing this to him, but the way that it's playing out is just so like amazing to see.
It's incredible, and I want to like focus on this first scene for a little bit as well, because we got some incredible dialogue between the two when Anatar's going, oh, I find it difficult to be festive when those affected most by Mordor's rise are still sorry. I'm like, shut up, you! How dare you, you little weasel! But then there's that great bit where Celebrimbor then goes, rings for men, and walks back inside, and Anatar says, I did not say anything of rings. And then Celebrimbor delivers what may be the best line of dialogue between Celebrimbor and Anatar, where he says, it is a game you play, is it not? Sowing seeds in others' minds and then convincing them that the fruit is of their own thought. And it was just like, oh, this is so good, because it is exactly what it should be between Celebrimbor and Anatar. Like, that Celebrimbor is so close to seeing through the veil of lies, but he's so enamored and so indebted to Anatar for the knowledge and for the help and for giving him these gifts and this knowledge that he can't get past this. And so like he sees the way that Anatar speaks so surreptitiously and deceptively to him, but he can't make that final leap. And I just thought starting the episode with Celebrimbor, calling him out but not making the final logical leap was so tantalizing. And it's the moment where you want to reach through the screen and grab Celebrimbor and go, yes, he does do that. What is he doing to you?
It's just so well done. And I was actually speaking to someone today who said that they were really confused by Celebrimbor, and they thought that he was kind of too susceptible to the deception. And I think that a lot of people aren't thinking about Celebrimbor's actions and his choices from his perspective. We're looking at it from the audience perspective. We know exactly what happens with these rings. We know what happens with Sauron, and we know how this story ends up. Celebrimbor doesn't. He doesn't have that foresight. All he knows is that if it's like Anatar, as well as deceiving him, at the same time he's backing him into this corner. So it's like he might be aware that this deception is happening. And I think we actually touched on this, before the season even aired. We said, we don't think he's going to kind of maintain this deception the whole way through. Celebrimbor is going to know at some point that something's not right. He says it clearly, like he's sowing seeds and convincing him of things that he didn't think of. But he's so desperate to make, maybe just not even these rings, but he knows that if he goes to tell the truth, he'll never be allowed to kind of make anything that he wants again. And that's the position that Anatar's got him in. So it's not even this willful deception of, he wants to make the rings, so I'm going to make them with him. It's, if I give him up now, and if I give all of this up, I'm giving everything up,
Yeah, and it goes back to that scene in episode 3, when he first decides to lie to Gil-galad and he says, I have apprenticed, I have studied, I've reached the very height of my craft. This is my moment, he will not take it away from me. And it's like, it is that Feanorian pride and ego
Yeah.
that is being preyed upon. And what I want to relate this to is, for those of you who've read the Silmarillion, and I've wanted to talk about this for weeks, but I've kind of been waiting to see more of it. But there is a section, I think it comes in chapter 6 of Feanor and the Unchaining of Melkor, where we hear about Melkor, who has been, for those of you who maybe aren't familiar, Melkor was the original name of Morgoth, the first Dark Lord, and after his initial war with the Valar, he's chained up, and then they eventually pardon him because the Valar, they try to be forgiving, they try to practice Eru's forgiveness, and Melkor basically wanders around Valinor, where all the elves are at this point, and basically just starts sowing little seeds of lies. And the person who he has the most success with is Feanor. And he starts telling him lies about his half-brother Fingolfin, and he starts feeding into his paranoia about the Valar keeping the elves there as thralls and about how they lust over Feanor's designs. And when this is happening, what Feanor does in response to that, and then his kind of quarrels with his half-brother Fingolfin, is Feanor withdraws from Tirion upon Tuna, which is the kind of main city of the elves within Valinor, and he retreats to his own stronghold in the north of Valinor called Formenos. And it's said that there he made his own forge, and there he started working on things of his own, and he made weapons, and he does all this stuff on his own there. But it all comes back to Melkor feeding these little seeds of lies, which, as Celebrimbor says in the scene, Feanor starts to think are his own ideas. He starts to think he's the one who's, clocked that Fingolfin is trying to undermine him and undermine his father Finwë, and he wants power. And it is what I love so much about the way the show's portraying it, is that just as the Silmarillion tells us that Sauron in the Second Age rose like a shadow of Morgoth, he is very much running the Melkor 101 playbook on the grandson of Feanor. He is feeding into his paranoia, he is feeding into his pride and ego, and he is causing him to isolate himself. And once he is isolated, that's when he has him in his grasp. Now, what he doesn't do is he doesn't make the mistake. Well, he doesn't make it yet, because I guess you could see the forging of the One Ring being this mistake, but Melkor basically makes a mistake at one point in the Silmarillion where he goes to the gates of Formenos and speaks with Feanor, and he goes one step too far in his manipulation and his lies, and Feanor shuts the door on him and calls him a jail crow. And so if you think about that within the story of Celebrimbor, where we're going, there's going to be a point at which Celebrimbor resists and fights back again, once he realizes Anatar's true intentions. And so seeing this play out in this episode, for me, like, it was so satisfying, because I was just like, not only is this a brilliant interpretation of the very little Tolkien wrote about Anatar's time in Eregion with the elves and with Celebrimbor, it is also allowing us to see Sauron and Anatar as this very literal, mini Morgoth, this shadow of Morgoth, who while he may think highly of himself, all he really is, he's a stooge, he's a stand-in for Morgoth, who, as Tolkien said, whose evil was only lesser in the fact that, it came from Morgoth. So I had to bring that up because I think it's something they've been hinting at all the way back from episode 3, but this idea of isolating him and feeding the lies which then become his own is just so beautiful.
I like that you bring up the isolation as well, because I know we kind of knew that he would be isolated from Lindon and the kind of outside world of the elves, and he does that physically. He destroys the bridge, he kills all of the messengers that Gil-galad sends over, but now he's begun to isolate him within Eregion as well. And oh my god, my heart kind of broke for him, when Medania gets this glimpse into the unseen world and sees kind of the true form of Anatar Sauron, and he flips it on his head, and he makes it out like he's being like sympathetic and really, really concerned for Celebrimbor, but he's begun this internal shift of turning the ringsmiths against Celebrimbor. And the more that Celebrimbor his behavior becomes more erratic, because, as we said, he's been pushed into this corner, the more believable his lies are going to be. So he's sowing these seeds not only in Celebrimbor's mind, but everyone else's, because he doesn't outright say to Medania, I don't think that what she saw was Celebrimbor. He just hints at it and she makes that leap. He sows the seed and she takes the leap. It's exactly like Celebrimbor says.
Yeah, I think it's, and as well, it goes back to this, and we haven't got to this yet in the show, obviously, but when the elves do revolt against Sauron, you have to remember in the books, Sauron sees it as a betrayal. He thinks that he's been such a good friend to the elf. Like, he is so deluded by his own ego, his own sense of grandeur, his own sense of value that he's bringing to the elves, that he sees the elves fighting back against him as a betrayal. And so there are moments, even in this opening scene, when Celebrimbor says no, or when he questions him, where you see this flash of anger on Anatar's face. And it's this whole idea that, Sauron can barely stomach the idea that they shouldn't be grateful to him. But sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say Naomi makes a really good point about, when I was talking to this person today who says that they were kind of surprised by how easily Celebrimbor was going along with this deception. I was like, the surprising thing I think is that he's given more agency and more fight in the show. So if you think that he's kind of just being dragged along here, you're probably in for quite a shock when you read the books as well.
Yeah.
And I think I love the direction that they've gone with him this season, because I think that's what me and you said. Kind of one of our hopes going in was that they give him that fight. They don't just let him kind of be blindly led along.
Yeah. The other thing I want to talk about with this scene is that when Sauron is trying to convince Celebrimbor that they need to make the rings, the 9 rings for men, one of the things he starts talking about, which I thought was so well done from the show, and it's not important this season, but it will be so important in the next 2 seasons, is when he starts talking about Númenor, and, he says to Celebrimbor, have you been to Númenor? And I love how exasperated Celebrimbor is. He's like, no, I haven't. And it's like, what has that got to do with our debate? Again, this is where I go back to them being like a married couple, like, because if you've been in a relationship, you've all had a moment with your spouse where you're arguing and they bring up something which you're like, that is not relevant to the argument we're having. And so I kind of enjoyed Celebrimbor's response to that. But what I really liked was the way Sauron spoke about Númenor, and he said, it is remarkable but fractured, ever teetering between glory and ruin. I fear Númenor more than any land in Middle-earth. I had hoped our rings might make her stable. Now, obviously, that last bit about hoping the rings would make Númenor stable is a lie. But everything, and again, it goes back to this idea of how Sauron manipulates. He tells the truth. He does fear Númenor more than anyone else. Sauron remembers the might of the Edain and how they joined forces with the elves in the First Age against Morgoth and Sauron. He remembers that Earendil, and he goes on to reference them. He references Earendil and Tuor and Beren, son of Barahir. And the reason he's listing those, and it sounds like he's saying, oh, these are all the people he admired, but these are all the men of the First Age, or not strictly completely men when you get to Earendil, but all the others, they are men who played pivotal roles in opposing Morgoth and Sauron. So he's raising them to Celebrimbor as like, remember these great figures of men, these people who shined brighter amidst the darkness. But for Sauron, it's actually coming from a place of, these are the men I feared. This is what I know men are capable of. So what he's really saying is, I need the rings to dominate and subdue these men. But in his kind of twisted logic and way of manipulating Celebrimbor, he uses their names to invoke a sense of good and righteousness about men. And I just thought that was perfect writing for Anatar's character.
It was so good, and listen, as a Tolkien nerd, hearing Anatar talk about kind of fearing the might of Númenor and then immediately getting those name drops, I was just kind of sat there and I was like, this is why I love this show. And I do think it's quite funny that he kind of invokes Eärendil and uses it to kind of say to Celebrimbor in whatever way, these are the men who would be deserving of these rings. And then you have Eärendil's son kind of a few hundred miles away being like, please, guys, just throw the rings away. Just don't use them. They're bad. They're terrible. They're evil. I find that quite funny. But
I also want to...
I just love these little references.
I also want to pick up on like some of the more interesting ways you can interpret the names they chose. Like Elendil is the obvious one, obviously the one who went to Valinor, who sought the aid of the Valar, who helped them, who basically got them to come and destroy Morgoth and lay him low. And Beren is also another obvious one because you obviously think of Beren's role in the theft of the Silmaril. Obviously, Sauron captured him at one point, but then escapes with Lúthien's help. But I thought it was also very interesting he referred to Beren as son of Barahir. Now, that obviously is partly just the show flexing like what it can quote from the text, but I think what it was as well was the fact that Barahir, for those of you who don't know, was the first Edain, one of the first men to form a real friendship with the elves. He was obviously the one who the Ring of Barahir, which is passed down, which hopefully one day we will see Elendil wear, but obviously we see Aragorn wearing in The Lord of the Rings, both the books and the films. But the Ring of Barahir was a ring given by Finrod to Barahir. The point being is that once again we are connecting Sauron's fear of Beren, but also of Finrod and Finrod's close friend. And again, we think of Finrod, we think of Galadriel. So this idea of having Barahir there. And then I thought the most interesting one was Tuor. And Tuor is interesting because obviously he marries Idril, and obviously therefore Erendil comes. Obviously you could just see it as like, well, he's just name checking. But I think the most interesting thing about Tuor's story when we think about it is that Tuor was the only man to ever sail to Valinor and to be accepted as one of their, because obviously for those of you who haven't read the Silmarillion, Tuor sails to Valinor at the end of his life once Eärendil's grown to kind of, I don't want you to call it adulthood. And he is the only man who ever sails to Valinor and is accepted and is granted an immortal life. And I think why that's so fascinating, especially for Sauron, is because if we go back to episode 1 where he says, the Valar will never forgive you, I think again we're getting to this permanent hang-up that Sauron has, that the Valar will never accept him. He thinks they'll never forgive him, and he was unwilling to do his penance. But I almost thought it was fascinating name-checking Tuor as someone that has been... Oh, Anna's getting involved in the chat now. But I thought it was fascinating to have him invoke Tuor as someone who was accepted by the Valar, was honoured by the Valar. And yes, obviously, they're probably just name-checking it as a great hero of the First Age and someone who obviously... from him comes Eärendil, but I just thought it's another way you could invoke kind of all of Sauron's anxieties and insecurities and hatred. So maybe I'm reading too much, but that's how I chose to read it.
I don't think you are. And you say, as you say, it could just be they've got the rights to these names. They're going to flex on that a little bit. But when you're talking kind of specifically about people that Sauron fears, you're gonna wanna put in kind of the main players for that, especially if you have the rights to these kind of big names from the First Age, But it's just hearing them dropped, it makes me wish, and I just can't imagine how they would capture it in live action. But wouldn't you just love to see this, like the whole of the Silmarillion just kind of put to screen? I almost would and I wouldn't because I don't think that they could do it.
No, I think I've always said the only way you could do it is like an animated series that was also an
Yes.
anthology. So you do like a season on the kind of like years of the trees, Valaquenta. You do a season
Yeah.
about Beren and Lúthien. Anyway, we could talk about that another time, I guess. But the last thing I want to say about this opening scene that I thought was so fascinating was that in the end, when Celebrimbor kind of gives him a hard no, it's like Sauron loses his patience and he's like, fine. I will just make them myself. Now, obviously, I think he never intends to make them on his own because, obviously later we see that he's basically once again baiting Celebrimbor into helping him. But I thought it was very interesting that he tries to undercut Celebrimbor's pride as a creator and a smith by basically saying, fine, you won't help me? I'll do it myself, and I don't even need you. And it's like, that's almost, again, going back to this idea of planting seeds. It's Anatar's way of knowing that he's going to get him eventually, but instead he says, no, I think I'll just make these myself. I don't even need you. I know I've told you you're
Yeah.
the artisan I need to heal Middle-earth, but actually, maybe I can just do it by myself.
It's almost that look on Celebrimbor's face where he's like, wait, you think that you could do this without me? Like, this was my idea, this was my project. And one thing that I think is really underrated is almost the kind of subtle comedy within
Yes.
Charlie Vickers' portrayal of Anatar. And it is very subtle because there is this menacing thing, but it's as you say, he's like, you know what, that's completely understandable. I understand why you don't want to be involved in this, and that's completely fine. He takes a dramatic pause, walks halfway down the stairs, and then he turns around and he's like, I'll just do it myself. Carries on walking. Like there's just so many things going on with his performance that sometimes you don't take in all the aspects of it. There's like this horror, this the kind of abuse towards Celebrimbor, this just menace, but then at the same time he's like hilarious. It's like I
Yeah.
don't know how to take this.
Well, like I said, in that first scene, where he's telling him that he told Celebrimbor to keep his remarks short and you don't always listen to me. And then this whole thing, like you even saw it when Medania patted him on the arm when Celebrimbor was giving his speech. Like, he can't stand it when anyone patronizes him. Like, it is, I love this aspect of Sauron that he's just
It's
like,
really good.
I was the right hand to Morgoth. I am an angel. I am one of the Maya. And you are patting me on the arm. You are like almost, treating me like a disgruntled, husband, a disgruntled wife. It's just like, I absolutely love it.
It's
But
so well done.
let's take a brief break to talk about, the kind of couple of Gil-galad. We'll return to the scene with Merdania and the kind of end of the episode in Eregion in a second, but let's briefly touch on Gil-galad in Lindon, which I thought was a kind of fascinating little intercut. Obviously, we got the scene where Celebrimbor's letters being read out. Celebrimbor is basically, we get a voiceover of his letter to Gil-galad, and then we see him talking with his commander of the southern armies, and she's urging him to set sail now to attack Mordor, but he's getting these visions of these landslides of rocks, of a river run dry with dead fish in it, of orcs drinking kind of blood out of some body part, which I chose not to try and think about for too long, and we get a flash of Sauron in his original armored form we saw in season 1. I mean, I just love the way they're doing these. They do it about once an episode where we see, either Galadriel or Gil-galad have these flashes of foresight through the ring, and I think it creates this great sense of ominous tension of what's to come.
It's so good as well because I think they really lean into the fact that they don't know whether they can trust these visions because obviously it's building on things that the kind of things that they already had, but there is this probably like unanswered question in Gil-galad's mind: how much of Sauron's influence is on these rings? Do I take advice from it or do I trust the commanders of my armies? That sort of thing. And listen, I was really sad with how kind of quickly it cut away from Gil-galad, but there's more important things to see to this episode, and also it just means we're one step closer to seeing him finally wielding Aeglos, which I'm very excited for. But yeah, I'm just gonna say, because I've not rewatched this episode yet. The first time I watched it through, the kind of scene where everything's flashing through, obviously it happens really quickly. So when I first saw this moment of like the original form Sauron, and then it immediately cuts to like something burning, I was like, oh my god, that's
It's not. No,
suspense.
I had the same
Yeah,
thought.
so the first thing I was like, oh my god, but they didn't do that.
Yeah, if you've watched the trailers enough time, you'll recognize the burning as like orcs being on fire outside the walls of Eregion. Sorry to spoil people, but if you've seen the trailers, So that's what it actually is. But for the people saying like, oh, it's a reference to how the last alliance, I totally get that. Just want to address a few comments in the chat. Where are they? Gaurav is back again and says, here I am at 3 a.m. again listening to a voice I've come to like talk about fictional zombie kings and create allegories of marriage based on the relationship between a dark sorcerer and elven smith. Well, Gaurav, thank you so much for joining us again. I know it's late for you. Please, I'm going to say the same thing I said to you 2 weeks ago, I think it was. Please go to sleep and you can catch up on the rest of the morning, but we really appreciate you listening. What else do we get here? Halbrand's Pouch says, I was confused about Gil-galad's motivations this episode and his reluctance to go help Eregion. We'll talk about it in a second, but I think we get the biggest clue when he speaks to Elrond, so maybe I'll come on to that. But Joshua also asks, how did Celebrimbor's letter arrive before Elrond? Well, I think the simple answer there is that Elrond has basically gone the long way round, and then they've had the whole thing with the Barrow-wights, and then being intercepted by the orcs, and then he's having to, run back. I mean, I'm always a bit like with things like this on the TV show. I'm like, oh, who knows how much time has passed? I don't think we know whether it's been a long time or a little time between the letter arriving and Elrond arriving. But in terms of, so obviously, yeah, we get, and hang on, let me just address this. People may have seen my tweet on my post on Twitter about that we should have kept getting shots of Elrond running throughout the episode, but each time he's just removing a new piece of clothing. Can I just say, when I tweeted that, A, I didn't expect it to get like 1,500 likes, which is an absurd amount for a very silly tweet, but B, I didn't mean it in like a sexual way, like I wanted Elrond to end up running naked through the forest. I just meant it was funny that he takes off his cloak to run faster, so I thought it would be funny like if we just had like 5 of these shots spread throughout the episode, and then like in the next shot he's like removing his gauntlets, and then the next one he's removing his belt, like his sword belt. Like I was thinking it would be funny like that, but very quickly it ended up with like me saying that Elrond should arrive in just his boots in Eregion in Lindon. So
I'm with you that it was definitely not long enough, but it was such like a quickly cut scene that I'm not gonna lie, for a second, as it kind of showed him running right to the edge of the shot, right to the edge of the forest, cloak off. I really thought he was going to jump off another waterfall. Like, I thought they were going to give us, like, 2.0, you know?
Just Elrond sees a waterfall, his first thought is, got to jump off that thing. Like, he's
like, well, it worked last time.
Yeah, it turns out that it wasn't actually meant to be like a serious moment in episode 1. He just loves jumping off waterfalls. He's like a base jumper. This is just what he does for fun.
Yeah, it's his primary transportation.
I will say the other funny thing in this scene is when it cuts to a wide shot of him running, you see that like Camnir and Rian and all the other elves, they're way behind him. I'm like, is Elrond just a really good runner, or have they not worked out yet that you have to remove items of clothing to like power up your speed?
Take the capes off.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Lavender has a good comment here and says Camnir arrives the day after Elrond because he was picking up all the clothing. I would have loved that. But let's talk about, because Halbrand's Pouch brought this up about like that final scene where Elrond arrives in Eregion and says, the orcs are not in Mordor, a legion of them are marching on Eregion, we must send our forces there now. And Gil-galad says that will not be possible, and Elrond says, why not? It's the jewel of Elvendom. If we lose it, it'd be a mortal blow to Middle-earth. And Gil-galad says, we cannot defeat Sauron and Adar's armies alone. But the important point is he says alone. And obviously, as we saw in the trailer, we know that Elrond is going to go to Khazad-dûm and ask Durin for his help. So I think, obviously, that's what that is setting up. But I also would really like the idea is that he's also going to get Círdan to send a message to Númenor asking for their help. And obviously, help isn't going to come because Pharazôn's, being a naughty boy. But I would really like that if in addition to having Elrond go to Khazad-dûm, I really hope they have some reference to Gil-galad sending a letter to the Númenorians, both as a nice nod to the books, and it will help set up when the Númenorians do finally come back to Middle-earth. Obviously, their intentions are going to be slightly different then, but I would really like to. So that's why I think Gil-galad says no. He's not actually saying, no, we're not going to help Eregion. The important point is he says we can't do this alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think you've touched on it really well then. And Gil-galad, I think we've talked about this before, isn't a wartime king, you know? So as new as it is to the people around him, it's quite new to him as well. So he's not going to make every decision perfectly. And, I think a lot of people said, Gil-galad never went to Eregion in the first place. And we know he is going to end up there. So whether it'll be kind of Elrond and Durin go there together, Gil-galad shows up afterwards in clutch, or it's like Elrond and Gil-galad get there at the same time, and it's Durin and the dwarves that come in. I actually don't really know how I think it's going to play out, because we know that Arondir is going to get there at some point, so it seems like there's just going to be this giant reunion at Eregion, while Celebrimbor's just kind of having the worst day of his life in the background. And then Galadriel's going to pull up in the cage as well.
It's like we're all here to tell you made a tragic mistake, and it'd be great if Elrond held up a giant banner outside Eregion saying, "This is an intervention. We're here to save you from your toxic husband." And yeah, but obviously we'll talk a little bit at the end about where we see Galadriel in this episode. But I do also appreciate Casey's comment here where she says Edna Mode would be so proud of the scene. No capes, which is a great reference to one of the best animated films of all time, and a film that had a great scene.
Impression.
Darling, I love all of Edna Mode's thing. I don't know who the voice actor is for Edna Mode, but she's brilliant. No capes, darling. Okay, all right. Let's return to Eregion for probably my second favorite scene in the episode, because I think my first favorite is that initial conversation between Celebrimbor and Adar. But then we get what I can only describe as like, it's like a horror film that turns into like a kind of mystery that turns into, you know, this kind of catch-22 situation for Celebrimbor. But I have to say, you know, we get this shot of Celebrimbor in his study kind of working over diagrams and things. And I kind of love that he's sulking that, you know, while while Anatar's helping the other elves make the ring, he's like, well, I'm just going to sit here and make some new designs, and I'm not going to go and help them at all. But yeah, so then we hear all this commotion, and Celebrimbor goes downstairs, and he finds all... I do like how when he goes down the stairs, Anatar's standing there like this, like, interesting, she disappeared. Fascinating. Like, he's not even that perplexed. All the other elves are like... all the other elves are freaking out. He's like, that's cool. Didn't know that was going to happen.
Well,
but then,
I
you know,
didn't even realize at first that someone had disappeared. So I spent the whole first minute watching that, trying to figure out who was making the everything float. Like, not in my mind, there was no thing of like, oh, that's Medania, like just kind of dragging things along behind the scenes. No, I thought Anatar was making things float for a second.
No, well, okay, here's my thing. A, I think most people thought that first, but B, can I say, I'm not entirely convinced he wasn't making things worse. Because, like, yes, it was obviously Medania, like, picking up the tools and, like, knocking things over on the table. But the forge exploding, that feels like Sauron making things worse by being like, this isn't dramatic enough. Let me have a little explosion in the forge. And so I just thought, like, I think, like, you're right in that obviously most of it was Medania, and we are meant to think at first that it's like Anatar like messing around, but I still think he might be.
Yeah, it is stuff like
making
the
things worse
hammer being like lifted up as if it was about to like whack someone in the head. I mean, I assume Medania was probably trying to attack this like figure that she was seeing, but
yeah,
it just made me laugh because I was like, right, who's doing this?
Exactly, yeah. So we get that, and then Celebrimbor gets hold of it and removes the ring from her finger, and you know asks, and Medania, you know, asks what's wrong, what happened, and Anatar obviously explains that they were, you know, trying out a new ring design, and then you know when Celebrimbor, you know, asks her, Medania says what she saw in the unseen realm, and this is what she says: "At first, I thought it was the forge burning, but it wasn't. It was tall and its skin was made of flames. It came towards me, breathing, reeking of death, and I saw its eyes, pitiless and eternal. I think it's been here. I think it's been here among us all along." Now, I have to say, one of our questions that we've had since like the first teaser trailer is like, when does you know, first it was who said that, then it was when does Medania say that, what she say it in reference to. And I have to say, all of our predictions were wrong, but I'm so glad they were wrong, because this was such a clever way to add an extra level of tension and unease to Anatar's growing manipulation of all the elves, to have one of them see his true form in the unseen world, and it to shake her so much to her core that she's, you know, she looks like she's about to have a panic attack and break down, and it was so good.
And it's like, oh, it's that horrible deception that the person that she saw in that form takes on this really soft kind of mentor-like approach, and he's like, it's okay, and he positions himself as this kind of safe haven away from Celebrimbor, who, you know, quite rightly is acting quite erratic because he's just seen all of this occur, because he thinks something's gone wrong with the ring design. And before we get into talking a little bit more about Medania, I don't want to talk too much about this because I just don't think it's a thing at all. She's not Celebrian. I don't
Thank
think she's
you.
Celebrian.
Thank you.
I think it just would not work at all with season one if she was Celebrian. She's not. I'm sorry, guys.
She's not. And listen, I'm always really, you know me, guys. I always say like, you're welcome to have whatever theories you want. I totally respect like people theory crafting because it's a fun way to spend time, waiting for new episodes, new seasons even. She's not. She's not effing Celebrian. It's such a stupid theory, and I'll explain why. It's not got anything to do with anything that happens in the show. It's just simple storytelling. It makes no sense. It makes no and don't give me the like Galadriel didn't mention Celeborn until episode 7 or whatever. It's not because of that either. It's because it would make no sense why Celebrian would be in Eregion, why she would be using a pseudonym. Galadriel's been in Eregion, so why wouldn't she know she was like it's and let me just say the fundamental thing. Galadriel thinks Celeborn has been dead since the First Age. Celebrian hasn't been born yet. Like, it's so clear the show is going with a version where she hasn't been born yet. And yes, I know that's a change from the lore, but they've changed loads of things. Like, and I totally get the main reason why people want her to be Celebrian is because they want to see Elrond have this love story in the show. And I totally get that because Rob's such a great actor and his version of Elrond's so lovely that you would really love to see that Elrond Celebrian love story happen in the show. But A, she's not born yet, and B, it's not going to happen. Like, it would take such a... I don't even want to go down this. I'm just going to say it's a stupid theory. And when we get to episode 8, and Medania obviously still isn't Celebrian, you can all take your anger back. But, like, I don't even want to entertain it. Sorry, Anna, you said we weren't going to spend a lot of time on it, but it is just so stupid.
Listen, when I see it, it gets me just as riled up, don't worry. But I think it'll be the same as the drowning thing, okay? People are going to try and gaslight us. They'll try and convince us otherwise. But we both know that it's not Celebrian. And even Stanley in the chat says that he doesn't want to see me and you agreeing on something. But it seems to be the controversial ones that we tend to agree on.
Stanley, can I just say, I don't even know who you are, but you have done nothing to ingratiate yourself to me across like 3 streams. Like, I can't tell if you're just like a... No, I think Stanley is just a bringer of chaos into this stream. It mainly just tells me that that you're the star here, and now it's just like I don't even want to see Harry and Harry. What do you want? What do you want? Okay. Anyway, we'll move on from this. What I will say was actually very interesting about the scene was the way that like we talked about like the idea of Na'vi and Anatar being like angel and devil on Medania's shoulder, and I love the way this shot was framed like that. Like you say, Anatar comes across to her so loving, you're safe now, you're with us, and then they almost stand like her 2 parents, one on either side. And having Anatar kind of lean into and Celebrimbor on the other side, it's just like this lovely moment of like, like parents, like, but one is a good influence, one is a bad influence. And then she walks away from them both to tell the story. And then obviously Celebrimbor is drawn away to go and deal with Durin the Younger arriving. And then the next thing we see is that Anatar's got her isolated and alone in the same way he does with Celebrimbor. And then he starts to put on the charm and compares her to Galadriel. And can I just say, like, I know that everyone who like ships Galadriel, like, again, I don't ship it, but like I'm always trying to be respectful to people's ships. But like, it's not about it being about Galadriel. It's not about Sauron wanting to like have a romantic relationship with Medania. It's about having it's about giving Medania the greatest compliment that any elf would like.
Yes.
And the reason specifically is he compliments the light of the forge catching her hair. Now, for those of you who've read the Silmarillion, you know that Tolkien says that Galadriel's light seemed to have caught the light of one of the 2 trees. So it is like this way of giving her the ultimate compliment that anyone could ever want, saying, you look like the elf whose very hair was touched by the light of the 2 trees. But it's a horrible inversion of that, because what he's doing is he's actually associating it with the light of the forge, which is a false light. It's a mechanical light. It's a light that's being used for the creation of the rings. So it's not only a way to compliment her, but in a typical Sauron way, it's using a false light to do this. And again, like you said earlier, Anna, why is he talking to her like this? So that he can convince her that the demonic thing she saw in the unseen realm was Celebrimbor.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that he shifts it this way because the two people we have this season in Eregion who've seen him in his true form are Celebrimbor and Medania. But he lets Celebrimbor see him in this form in the way that he wants him to. And, you know, Celebrimbor literally says to him, he kneels to him and he says, "You have let me see you in this form." And when Medania kind of slips into the unseen world, she's seeing him for what he truly is. You know, that's not what he wants people to see. And I like that they make the reference to the way he smells because, you know, that's sort of the etymology of where the name Sauron comes from, that kind of smell of that, the smell and the reek of death. It's just, it's so well done, and I really like the way they kind of mirror these things, like the light that Celebrimbor sees and the dark that everyone else sees, but he doesn't panic, he just frames it as if it's not him that they've seen, it's Celebrimbor. And the way that he framed it really weirdly, because when he first said it, I was like, they're never going to believe that that's Celebrimbor, but it's almost the way he says that, like, this kind of, he's sunken and he's exhausted and he's tired, and it makes sense. You know, you can kind of see why Medania's taken with it. And listen, if Charlie Vickers Anatar came up to me and, like, played with my hair and was like, "You remind me of Lady Galadriel," I would fall for it too.
Yeah.
See?
I mean, look even how uncomfortable she is in this shot where he touches her hair. Like, it is such a, like, overreach from him. And, like, I always go back to this thing, like, we talked about it in one of the earlier things, that, like, when, you know, when Anatar, like, says to Durin, "Oh, Elrond says you were the wisest of the dwarves," and Durin immediately clocks him because, you know, that's not how friends talk about each other, as Anna and I know well. And it's like the same thing. He doesn't know how to act like a good person. And so it's even this where he's trying to, like, charm her. He's like, he just goes a step too far. But I did actually want to bring up Katie, because Katie, of course, my favorite person when talking about Anatar and Sauron on these streams, because Katie brings up, of course, what I would love to say, which is just going to throw this out there, that the three of them together is 1000% Hannibal, Will, and Alana coded, or the one daughter figure Will and Hannibal have. Not going to talk about the end of season 2. You're so right. Like, when I talked about them being parents, it is this exact same way, where, for those of you who've seen Hannibal, there's that. We can't really talk about it without spoilers, but for those of you who have, Hannibal as Anatar, Will Graham as Celebrimbor, and Medania is almost playing the Alana role in here. So thank you, Katie, for bringing that up, because it's so good. And I think what's also clever about this scene, before we get onto this one, is that when Celebrimbor is interrupted by the news of Durin's arrival, he's just about to break because, you know, Anatar's baited him with the "just one word of counsel will solve us so much toil," and he's like, you should," and then he's interrupted by the Durin the Younger thing. Jessica, you're way too late, because we've already been telling everyone that thinking Medania is Celebrian is stupid, so you've missed it, but she's not Celebrian. Anyway, feel free to rewind 5 minutes if you want to hear us really going on that one. But there's not much to talk about. We already covered it earlier, didn't we, where Durin the Younger is saying about, you know, it's made his father greedy.
Yeah, I mean, the only kind of, like, I don't know if I'd say it's a criticism, but I think sometimes that this show shows time passing very well, and other times it doesn't. And I know that you can't spend episodes showing, like, who's coming and who's going from where, but that there's moments, and I think, you know, I know that there's Eregion and Khazad-dûm are in a lot closer proximity than a lot of other locations in Middle-earth. But when it comes to, like, the dwarves and stuff, these past few episodes, it's felt like they're kind of like, now they're in Eregion, now they're back in Khazad-dûm, now they're in Eregion again, and now they're back at Khazad-dûm, and I don't know how much time is passing between, like, each between each location that we're at, and it kind of throws me off sometimes when all of a sudden Durin is just back in Eregion, and I'm like, oh, okay, here he is. But that might just be me.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I know what you mean. Like, and what's even funnier is there's very clearly a scene that's been cut in two. So, and I don't have a screen cap, but when Durin interrupts his father and Navi's meeting, and it is like, we mustn't dig deeper. Disa has seen, heard some ancient evil between. And then it cuts back to Eregion, and then Durin appears in Eregion, and then we cut back later in the episode to Durin having another conversation with his father where he's like, Father, I have been to Eregion. I'm telling you, there is some devilry work to this ring. Can I just tell you, this is very clearly the same scene that has been cut in two. And the embarrassing thing is, the way you know is that in both scenes, King Durin has a plate of food on his desk in front of him. And it's the same plate of food in both scenes. So it's very clearly originally that whole sequence of King Durin talking to Na'vi and then Durin interrupting and then saying there's devilry in these rings and then being reinstated as, prince. That was all clearly one scene, and then they were like, oh no, we need to spread this out through the episode. But it's very clearly the same scene.
You know what? I didn't even notice that, so props to you for that one.
Yeah. No, well, there I am. Jess, I can still see you saying, chat, clip that for when she's revealed to be Celebrian. You already missed the bit where I said, after episode 8, when she's very clear not revealed to be Celebrian, I will be accepting apologies from all of you. So how about that? I'm so confident. Listen, whoever's in the chat who believes she's Celebrian, if she turns out to be Celebrian, I'll send you a $5 on PayPal. That's how confident I am. I'll put money on it. Oh, can we not make fun of my headcanons because it hurts my feelings? Jess, I hate to tell you, but I'll make fun of anyone's headcanons. This is a no mercy. This is a no mercy space. Anyway, so then after Durin visits, we get what is probably, one of my other favorite scenes with Anatar, where, Celebrimbor says to him, well, first there's the brilliant bit where Anatar gaslights him again because, Celebrimbor's saying, what if there is a fault with the rings? And Anatar's saying, or maybe King Durin's misusing his. And he says, no, I don't believe that. And Anatar says, as one who so masterfully manipulates metals, just be mindful someone is not manipulating you. And then Celebrimbor says, you see daggers where there are none. And Anatar says, and you do not see them until they are already at your throat. And it's just like another one of these moments where you're like, oh, he's such an evil, I can't even say what I want to say.
It's like... Oh. It's like you just want to push Celebrimbor like just that little bit further. You're like, come on, you're almost there. You've almost got it. Just go a little bit further. But it's just it's kind of masterful the way he does it. He's called Sauron the Deceiver for a reason. And I like that they've really lent into it. And it's not just this kind of. He's not treating Celebrimbor like he's stupid. He's thinking about how to twist this. It's like. It's almost like he has had this plan, but he didn't expect Celebrimbor to kind of push back so much. So it's like when he gets to all these kind of roadblocks, he's almost kind of twisting and turning how his deception works just to fit it into, to kind of mold it to Celebrimbor specifically.
Exactly. And the thing I love about this is then that Celebrimbor tries to open up to, because Celebrimbor, despite his pride, despite his ego, he genuinely wants things to work. And so he turns to Anatar and he says, did you alter the rings? Yes or no? And you can tell there's a real earnestness in Celebrimbor's eyes. And Anatar says no before dropping the bomb of, we did, we forged these rings under a cloak of deception. Deceit was introduced into the process, and it's just, and it broke my heart when Anatar says that, and Celebrimbor goes, because Anatar says the letter, and Celebrimbor goes, no, that was, and you can see him falling apart inside already, and obviously we see that then throughout the rest of that scene and the end of the episode, but just the way he needles him and says, you lied to your High King, you did this, you did that, and it's just breaking Celebrimbor one, as people are saying in the chat, it's gaslighting, it's classic abuse, and it's again, I know the show is is because it's conservative and doesn't care about me, isn't going to give me like the full this show should be made for me, specifically me. It's
Who's that an impression of?
no, but I just often feel like when people talk about the show, they're like, why isn't this about me? Why isn't this show specifically made for me among the millions of viewers? Like, it should be made for me. Anyway, sorry, we've
Please,
been
can
going.
someone clip that, please?
It's for me. We've been going for 3 hours. You know what's happening. But yeah, and then we kind of end on this wonderful moment where Sauron says, we must either confess, we must either go to Lindon and admit what we've done, or we must forge on into the maelstrom. And there's this shot I love because it's the way Anatar is over his shoulder. It's predatory. He's looming behind him, and Celebrimbor looks back at him almost for reassurance. And I think this is where it's sold on the abusive relationship, is that Celebrimbor looks across at him for reassurance, and Anatar doesn't meet his gaze. He just carries on staring straight forward. He imposes his will on him that he won't even meet his eyes. He's already looking forward as they're going to forge on into the maelstrom, and Celebrimbor can't even get that little bit of reassurance.
It's just, it's so well done. He's truly the devil over his shoulder, And it's quite scary actually, because we have 3 episodes left now, to kind of culminate all of this. So it means that basically we're gonna have no peace for the next 3 episodes. Any
It's only gonna get worse.
Celebrimbor's joy, gone.
It's gone already. And I just want to talk about that last shot. So obviously Celebrimbor gives his speech, which I thought was like probably Celebrimbor's most Feanorian, not maybe his most, but one of his most Feanorian moments, where he's just like
to everyone, I asked Harry today because I was in work today and I didn't have a chance to rewatch the episode. So I asked Harry to kind of make a few notes for me just so I could go through, and the notes for this scene just say Celebrimbor gives a motivational question mark in brackets speech.
It's true.
So,
it's true. It's he tries to give a motivational speech, but he's really not in the right headspace, and so he's basically like, "Listen, guys, we're gonna do something so good. We're gonna draw strength for the 3. We're going," and I want to talk about the fact that he uses the word redeem. But he says we're going to redeem the 7, and we're going to work night and day. And like at the start, it sounds like my motivational speech. He's like, I'm going to be by your side every step of the way. Like, what a good boss. He's going to be working overtime with them. And then he's like, and if one of you so much as takes a toilet break while we're working on this, then you are not going to be a Smith of Eregion anymore. And it's like the mania is just consuming him. And it's like, in season 1 when he kept talking about true creation requires sacrifice, we've almost reached the zenith of that now, where it's like, I will sacrifice myself. I will sacrifice all of you. You will pour everything. And, you can see Medania's face in this scene, because all she's thinking is, this is the dark figure I saw in the unseen world that Anatar told me about. And Celebrimbor doesn't know it, but he's playing into this idea that Anatar has already fed into. And then the way after he leaves to go upstairs, Anatar gives his own, I know Celebrimbor seems unreasonable. I know he's this and that, but it's only because he wants the best. Shall we begin? He's like, that scene was seeing that side of Celebrimbor, and then seeing the way Anatar swept in afterwards to present himself as the good guy. It was
It's so
disgusting.
well done, because the worst thing about it, or kind of the best thing about it from our perspective, is that there was this mistrust of Anatar when he first arrived, and Celebrimbor was the one to build him up and build that trust between Anatar and the elves, and now he's using that against him. He's the one with their trust, and he's turning them all against Celebrimbor. So he's kind of stood down there, kind of spurring them on, while he's sat up in his study, crying to himself, whatever he's doing right here.
Yeah. I just want to address a couple of comments, chat. Firstly, Higgy's got to go. He says he's got to head out now. Date night with the missus. See you all post episode 6. Higgy, thank you so much for joining us on this episode. Always lovely to have you in the chat. And enjoy your date night and touching grass. I was actually meant to go out for dinner tonight with my 2 of my cousins, one of whom who is over from Australia. So, true creation really does require sacrifice. Anyway, that's just a fun story about me. Where was the other comment? Oh yeah, Chris says, "Don't worry, folks. Celebrimbor will become a wraith who bonds with Talion." Chris, I know you're joking, but if you ever bring up the disgrace that is Shadow of Mordor's interpretation of Celebrimbor again, I will block you so quickly because that thing is an insult to my boy Celebrimbor. I'm only joking, but I really do hate it. And yeah, I mean, I don't know what else to say about this final shot of Celebrimbor. It broke my damn heart. And not just this close-up of him, like, losing his composure, looking at his hands, which are shaking. It's the bit where it then zooms out to a wide shot and you see him sitting alone, all isolated in the dark, papers crumpled on his desk. It's just I know I've said before, and people know that he's my favorite second age character, but like this, and I know where his fate is going, and that is going to make me sad. But I think this is making me more sad, seeing his whole life and his whole joy, the thing he loves the most, which is his work, his craft, his creation, his forging. Seeing that tear him apart, I think it's more painful for me than anything to come.
I think I struggled with that as well during the first few episodes when kind of Anatar first arrives and he tells Celebrimbor that the three rings did work, life has been restored to Lindon. And he's so happy that he doesn't know whether to kind of laugh about it or cry about it. And it made me so sad because I was like, this is exactly what's going to be used against him. Like this is his downfall, the kind of love that he has for this creation. And I just, Charles Edwards, I'm really, really very upset that this is our last season with him. I hope to see him in lots more.
Yeah.
He's just an incredible actor. I mean, I feel like he was we've talked about it before, and I know that there were scheduling issues, casting issues, whatever, but he was so underutilized in season one that I'm so mad that he only got this one season to shine, and he's done such an impeccable job. But oh my gosh, the next three episodes are just gonna kill me, I think.
Yeah, I do also just want to address Jessica, who says, "Harry, why do you have to make everything about you?" And to answer simply,
I
to
agree.
quote from, shut up, to quote from episode one of Peter Capaldi's run as Doctor Who, when Jenna Coleman's Clara says, "Nothing is more important than my egomania," and frankly, that's how I'd answer that question. Everything is about me. Anyway, let's turn to the final scene, which I think I described in my notes as. Did I describe it? Galadriel is released from her cage. She tries to take Adar hostage with a sneaky knife, but he says they should be besties because they have a common enemy. I mean, Anna, I know you enjoyed this short scene a lot, so maybe I should. I've spoken so much about Celebrimbor. I feel like I should hand this over to you.
Listen, I'm just going to tell you guys a quick behind the scenes fact. So before we started, kind of went live, Harry told me that he made a little PowerPoint again. So, I asked him what he put in it and everything, and he said he included everything except Adar and Galadriel. So I said, excuse me, we got a shot of Galadriel holding a knife to Adar's throat once again, and you didn't clip it to put it in the PowerPoint. But don't worry, guys. As you can see, he went back and he put it in just for us. But we only got a little bit from these two, which kind of shocked me because the cliffhanger from last episode was him greeting her in with this kind of is it
Elvish.
Quenya he was speaking with this like kind of
Oh,
title
you
that he
missed.
gave
Do
her.
you know what you missed, Anna? You missed a whole like 10 minute. You would have. Well, you would have probably found it very boring, but I went on a whole 10 minute tangent about why he uses Altariel rather than Alatariel or Galadriel. But yes, he is speaking in Quenya. I won't do it again, but yes, he is speaking in Quenya.
But I did expect to see a little bit more of them, but I think it made sense. Like the focus of this episode to me was just perfect. But I'm glad we got this. It really did make me laugh that she's still surrounded by orcs. Literally, has just been let out of her cage. Still tries to kind of fight her way out of it, and it's just this is what I love about Adar. And I've been kind of forward about the fact that I really like Sam as Adar, but he's still not given me everything that I wanted from his character. But just the calmness and the coolness when he has this knife against his throat. There's no panic in his eyes. There's no worry. He's just like, I didn't bring you here as an enemy. Like you're not my prisoner. We've got this kind of common goal, and it's so good, and it means that we're getting that kind of dining scene of them next week. As you put it, kind of the Captain Barbossa Pirates of the Caribbean esque scene.
Yes.
But we're also a lot closer to Eregion than I thought, and that's my own fault because I know that we're 3 episodes away from this season being over. But in my mind, when they'd actually reached Eregion, I was like, oh my gosh, like we're here. Like I didn't realize how close Galadriel was going to be to Eregion before this all
Yeah.
kind of like kicks off.
It's funny because it's like we've known for like 2 years that there was going to be a 2 episode battle, and now we're going into episode 6, and we're like, I can't believe the battle's almost about to start. And we're like, might make sense. I just
Yeah,
want to address a
and
couple of
then
comments in the chat. Sorry, quickly before you go on. Halbrand's Pouch has got to go and says, have to go as well, guys. Have a morning class tomorrow
oh,
teaching.
thank you.
Good night and enjoy. Thanks so much for today. It's lovely as always. So thank you to you, Halbrand's Pouch. You've been lovely as always. And I think Katie's got to go as well and says, I'll see you when you're still going when I get back. But you probably won't because we're almost done.
Yes, we're
But
very close to the end.
but thank you both for being here. And the other comments I just wanted to address before I'll let Anna continue is basically everyone's response to this scene is they knew exactly what they were doing in this shot. Jessica, the sexual tension in this scene is out of control. Jess, Sam looks so hot here. Beric, Adariel rises. Jess and Rivendell, oh, this scene got me. I mean, I like that just... and Erin Lascallen's got to go as well, so got to check out, guys. Thanks for a great session. See you in the next
Bye.
one. Bye, Erin. But I do like that everyone's reaction to this scene was like, kind of hot.
Yeah, I mean, at first I was like, okay, they're going for a bit of a vibe between Adar and Galadriel. My first impression of it was to kind of like it out of spite to Galadriel because I just hate Halbrand still
Yeah.
guys, we've got barely anything of Halbrand this season and I still hate him. But come on, look at the material that we're getting with those two. And I also think that you're going to regret being like, okay, I'm just going to do some comments and then let Anna get back to her really important kind of analysis on the scene, because actually the only thing I had left to say was that I'm just really sad that I didn't get to see the orc building the cage. That was one of the storylines that I really wanted from this season, was this kind of
You
in a
did talk
of
about
orc
this once, didn't
factions.
you? You did
I
once
really
talk
wanted
about...
to see the orc building the cage. I
I,
had this in
so,
my mind that we were going to get it. I don't know why.
somehow I'd like blot this out from my mind, but it's just come back like a horrible post-traumatic like stress flashback of you going like, how did the orcs build a cage? It's like, Anna, they can
No,
build
no, 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 no,
catapults.
no, no.
Why can't they build a
It
cage?
wasn't like how did they build a cage. It was like, okay, they have this perfectly sized cage to fit Galadriel in it. I just liked the idea that they caught Galadriel and they were like, oh crikey, we've got nowhere to put her. And then this orc steps up and he's like, don't worry, I can build a cage. And then he shows he shows his worth as an orc. You know? That was just what I wanted to see.
I'm not even laughing at you describing this. I'm laughing at you giving you know your improv dialogue for what the orcs might say is, "Oh crikey!" It's just, I love the idea of the orcs like capturing Galadriel, you know, one of the most famous elders ever, and being like, "Oh crikey, what are we gonna do?" Like, yeah, it's but
It
no,
would
I
be
mean,
a bit of a tough situation to find themselves in. That's all I'm gonna say.
well, I gotta say, you were right that I was going to regret saying I'm gonna hand over my analysis back to Anna,
Exactly.
because that was, I will say, you don't always like, you know, you, how can I put this? No, you know what? You often bring insightful analysis. That just wasn't one of them, but I'm not shocked.
You know what? I think I've just kind of single-handedly changed Stanley's tune. I think he might be Team Harry now because we've just got the comment. Anna is interesting. LOL.
Yeah, yeah. Do you know what,
I've lost
Stanley?
him. I've lost
Yeah,
him.
you've lost Stanley. I like Beric saying Aussie accent orcs rather than Cockney accent orcs. I would love if there was an orc who's just like, Struth, Galadriel, how have you got here? Because it would just be a nice change from the rubbish Cockney accents we always get. But yeah,
See,
it's
Jessica says, and I get the orc getting the cage, but I sacrifice another crucial Númenor scene. I think I
it,
would be willing to make that
it's the
sacrifice.
monkey's paw thing. It's like you get less Númenor scenes, but you will get to see the
But
orcs build a cage. Anyway, I don't think and I realised there are actually Australians in the chat, so I apologise for my terrible Australian accent. Although, weirdly, when I spent some time in America, because I don't have a proper like English accent in terms of like a Queen's English accent, I did have a lot of people thinking I was Australian, but I don't know. No, Jessica, I can't do any more Australian accent. I'll do some more Bane for you guys. Yeah, actually, let's do that. So instead, the orcs are like, "You were merely born in the cage. I was molded by it." Anyway. Anna missed out on this last week, so it was just Bruce Wayne. I see you've reached Eregion. Okay. Anyway, there you go. You got one more Bane accent for the week.
Wow.
You happy, Anna?
I don't know if happy is the word that I would use. I'm feeling strong emotions, that's for sure.
Are you afraid? Anyway, okay. It's all right. Listen, I admit, like all my impressions, they're never any good. But it's the commitment to the bit that I think everyone appreciates.
I admire the confidence that you deliver them with.
Yeah, it would be very painful for you. Okay, I'm done. I promise, I'm done. God. Anyway, do it. should we wrap the stream?
Maybe this is a sign.
I ran out of wine like a good 45 minutes ago, and honestly, I've been running on fumes ever since. Erna says, "Can you do an Irish accent, Harry?" Listen, I know you live in Ireland now, and I've got a lot of Irish friends, and so for that reason, no, I'm not going to attempt to do an Irish accent. Although I will say I will never do a worse Northern Irish accent than Sam Neill does in Peaky Blinders, as Inspector Chester Campbell, where he mangles a Belfast accent so badly you'd think that Sam Neill was not a professional actor. Bane. Oh, Beric says Bane voice for Anatar dialogue. Hang on, let me see if I've got any Anatar. Okay, let me try this. As one. I can't do it. I can't do it.
I won't even like look at you through the screen. Just
Okay.
Go crazy. Go on.
As one. I can't find it. Okay, last chance. How do I get into the voice? Bruce Wayne crashing this plane with no survivors. Okay. No, let's not do this. Let's get our final thoughts on the episode and wrap up because it's like 20 past 11, and I like that Anne says Bane is the new Alatar Rickman. I'd forgotten about Alatar Rickman for everyone who was there for the Demetrius Polygon.
I kind of missed all that, and from what
that
I've
was when
heard
you.
about it, I'm kind of glad that
I
I
will
did.
I will say that was my least favorite time because like Anna just like disappeared off Tolkien Twitter and missed like all the good stuff. And like I'm sure you had good reasons in your personal life, but you have been out of the loop with everything
Listen,
Demetrius
we all
Polygon.
have our own kind of little spirals, don't we?
Yeah, we do. Okay, anyway, this
But
isn't
we
therapy.
come back to discuss Adar having a knife held to his throat. So
Yeah, I like.
everything's right in
I
the
do
world.
like that it was the classic like hair knife trick as well, like hiding a knife in your hair. I do like that. Okay, Anna. Final thoughts on episode 5. Even after 3 hours of discussion, still your favorite episode of season 2?
Yes. This is what I wanted from everything, from Númenor, from Eregion. Maybe not as much Gil-galad as I would have asked for, but listen, we're getting him in Eregion soon, so I can't complain. I feel like this season has been very fast-paced already, but I don't think I'm quite prepared for how much it's going to ramp up now. And like I'm almost scared because it's like, what do you mean we're watching episode 6 tomorrow? It's like we've been waiting so long for this, it almost feels like we're like at the end now, and I kind of want to just postpone it a little bit, be like, right, can we just wait a few weeks before the finale? Just kind of hold your horses, guys. But this is just, everything that we kind of hoped for before this season, I felt sort of realized in this episode. And it was just actually one thing that we didn't touch on that I do want to mention, that I'd kind of told myself this whole time that the Balrog was going to be a vision.
Oh, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about it.
All I'm going to say is that's my one hope that hasn't come to fruition. Little bit disappointed about that one, but apart from that, and the things that I was sort of negative about today, just overall such a good episode. I think it really focused on the individual characters and their dynamics with each other and how that affects the kind of wider themes that these seasons are about. And I think that's just when the Rings of Power shines. So just an incredible episode.
Yeah, I'm glad we skipped over the Balrog stuff because listen, when the Balrog finally appears, we will discuss it on one of these live streams. But until then, I don't even want to talk about it because it's annoying me already. What was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. Still, even after talking about it for 3 hours, still my favorite episode. Very excited for episode 6 though, because I think episode 6 is obviously going to be kind of the deep breath before the plunge of the siege of Eregion. So I'm very excited to see where they leave all our characters. Obviously, we're going to see we've still got to see Sauron going to Khazad-dûm. So why is he going to go to Khazad-dûm? I'm fascinated by that. Obviously, we've got Galadriel and Adar's "You best start believing in Middle Earth tales because you're in one" scene to come. Do briefly want to address Stanley in the chat who says, "Can Anna please be back next week?" You know what,
I've won
Stanley?
back.
Hopefully not. Hopefully not. Anna, do you want to come back next week?
I mean, if you really need me to, I guess I could.
No, I don't. I'll find another co-host. I'll sacrifice Stanley's viewership for some. I feel really bad. Light Blinded Fool says, "Hey folks, just joining now, so apologies if I bring up anything already discussed. Please ignore me if I do." Light Blinded Fool, we are probably 5 minutes from finishing, so I do apologize. But you'll be able to listen to the whole 3 hours, 20 minutes as soon as we're done. But thank you for coming. Anyway, it doesn't matter whether you're here for 5 minutes or 3 hours.
I guess if you want to give us maybe some overall thoughts on the episode just before we leave, or if anyone does actually, because we've both just said after a 3-hour discussion, do we still think it's our favorite episode? What do we think?
Yeah.
If anyone else has any kind of last thoughts about the episode,
We
get episode 6 tomorrow.
Yeah.
Let us know what you think.
God, how have you become a better host of this than I have in this last 5 minutes?
What can I say?
Yeah. Do you want to cover the costs of hosting and streaming and No, I'm kidding. Okay. That's what Patreon's for. Okay, last few comments. Anne says, "This was probably one of the best episodes of the show, but it's also my least favorite for obvious reasons." And that obvious reason being, of course, that it was the Rip Bozo
That we were right
for
about
Valandil.
Cameron drowning Valandil, obviously.
We're not being very sensitive to Anne. I'm sorry. We did all our very serious mourning of Valandil an hour and a half ago, so I apologize if we're not being
Yeah, I
sympathetic.
mean, if it helps, mid-show, I was fully immersed in the episode watching it for the first time, but when that happened, you were the first person I thought of, in that moment.
Yeah, exactly. I think we all did. And by the way, I know people have seen my reaction to the trailer where I famously did the hands on head when Celebrimbor started crying. But if you want to know what my reaction was when Valandil died, it was literally like a cartoon character. I went like this. I went and put my sorry, I can't talk while doing this, but I put my hand over my mouth my mouth was literally agape. And I put my hand over it like that. Okay, let's see what else people have to say. Light Blinded Fool says, "All I can say is Anatar on stream is more fair than Anatar in the show." Oh, that's a nice compliment towards Anna, I think. At least I think that's what it is. Is it? Yeah.
I think maybe. If it's not, then that's embarrassing.
I think Charlie's prettier than Anna, but that's just my bias.
I agree.
Yeah, we all agree. Anna,
especially in the Anatar getup.
Yeah, Anna is really quite basic looking. Okay, Chris says this was a really good episode. I do wish we got more of an equal mix of locations over every episode, though. Yeah, I mean, I'd really appreciate it if we just skipped Rune. What else we got? Jessica says, "Great episode, 10 out of 10. I rate every episode a 10 out of 10. Well, you are consistent, if nothing else, Jessica." Shane Donahue said, "First time I got here live, but just for the last bit. Thanks all. It's a good time. So early though." Well, Shane, I apologize. But like Anna said earlier, at least we go on for so long that we're admissible for all time zones. Joe says, the reordering of the timing of the ring forging from most good rings towards most evil rings probably makes sense for the show. Do you agree? Oh, I see what you mean. So in in the books they start with the forging of the lesser rings of the 7 and the 9. Then Sauron leaves to go and make the 1, and while he's away they make the 3. Does it work in the show? Yeah, I think it works in the show. Like, I've never been one of these people who was bothered by them making the 3 first. I think the important point has always been that the 3 weren't touched by Sauron's hand, like they made it outside of his direct influence. So I don't really have a problem with them inverting the order, and I think it might add more dramatic tension to go 3, 7, 9, and then 1. So yeah, I didn't. Are you of the same mind, Anna?
I'm in the same mind, and I think it actually added more to Celebrimbor's story this season, the kind of success of the Elven Rings. I like the way that they did it, especially because we get to see the impact on Lindon and Galadriel now.
Yeah.
And it means we got Círdan at the start, even if we might not get to see him again until season 3.
Yeah, it's true. It's true. I just got trying to reconnect. I think the live stream. Is it still live? I think it's still live. Okay, my thing. Okay,
Yeah,
anyway.
I think I'm still alive.
Okay, good. Last few comments and then we'll finish up. Rose-Colored Shades says, excellent episode, best Númenor stuff yet, and just a wonderful and imaginative rendering of how Anatar manipulated Celebrimbor into creating the rings, not to mention Papadoran getting into his tragic era. Couldn't agree with you more on everything. We are in total agreement there, Rose-Considerate Shades. Stanley says, when is the Balrog episode coming? Hopefully never. Beric says, yeah, the implication is that Celebrimbor made the perfect ones for the first time, and the others the influence of Sauron's increasing corruption. Yeah, I really like that interpretation as well, Beric. Jessica says, honestly, that makes more sense to me, and Tolkien should change the order in the Legendarium. Well, I'll organise a seance and ask Tolkien if he can make some edits.
It's quite funny because that's actually how people act. Like, that's what's going to happen to every change the Rings of Power makes. Is that it's going to kind of go back in time and erase what Tolkien wrote as well.
Yeah, that's true. We are actually, someone may remember this, but I had a rant during one of our season 1 breakdowns where I said that the people who hate the show seem to think that Jeff Bezos is personally going to kick down your door, take your copy of The Lord of the Rings, and start scribbling things out. And for some reason, I've just had a flashback to me doing that. Okay, last couple of comments. Shane says, Valandil's death, can't grieve yet because I'm too mad about Valandil and Elendil leaving Kem in the opening. I know, listen, that's what you get for being a good guy. Beric says, anyway, great stream once again, you two. I love tuning in while I work through my day. That's really lovely, Beric, and we always love having you here. Don't worry, Jessica, I could tell you being facetious. Well, we have reached the end of the stream, I think. Anna, we did miss you. You know, as much as I joke about it, we did miss you last week. I miss you occasionally, but it's clear the stream missed you a lot. And we're very glad to have you back. And, you know, much like in season 1, these breakdowns and reviews wouldn't be the same without you. So once again, I really appreciate you taking out these hours from your evening to come on and record and be live with us. Anna, any final thoughts, whether it's about the stream, episode 6 tomorrow, anything at all? Final thoughts, over to you.
Yeah, just thank you for having me back. I think you might be the same as me, especially with these streams that are kind of decidedly less prepared than maybe the podcast episodes that we do. I do tend to second guess myself, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is not the level of insight that people come for. But I think just kind of being on and even just like joking around and bouncing like really wild theories off each other about the season is just what I like to do. So I love coming on for these, and having kind of the familiar faces on every week is really nice. I don't think I've ever been in a community full of like smarter, kind of more passionate people, so it is just really nice to get the chance to interact with everyone every week. And as much as Harry says that he hates me, he still invites me back every week. So I think we might have like a little bit of like Stockholm syndrome here. Like, we're stuck with each other no matter what happens.
It's a bit Anatar and Celebrimbor, isn't it? You know, it's kind of like both need each other to create this, but it's not always great. Yeah.
And I've already got the name Anatar down, so I guess I know which one I am.
Well, listen, I would never be Anatar because I am a nice person who doesn't manipulate or gaslight or gatekeep. I do girl boss occasionally, but I don't do the others.
Please don't say that again, Harry.
It's all right. Can't be worse than anything else I've said. But no, once again, thank you, Anna, for coming on, and more importantly, or as importantly, I always mess that one up. Thank you to thank you to everyone who comes to stream. As I always say, whether you come for 5 minutes, an hour, or all 3 hours of these streams, I really do appreciate everyone who tunes in. And like I said, I do apologize, we aren't able to do these sooner in the week, and like the podcast last year, give you a few days to listen. I'll try and get the audio versions up both for last week, which I'm really sorry is still not up, last week, and this week's onto the podcast feed in the next couple of days. I've got to do a bit of traveling on Friday, so I'll see how quickly I can do that. But yeah, really just a big thank you to everyone who comes out to these. It's still a new experiment for me, relatively. Special thank you to everyone who's supporting the podcast and the channel and everything I do on Patreon. If you do want to learn more about supporting the Daily Rings of Power podcast and the channel and live stream and all the content we do, you can go to patreon.com/dailyrop. But please know there is no expectation or obligation. I'm just very grateful for anyone who does support. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another one of these, won't we, Anna?
We will, if Harry will have me back.
Yeah, if you'll turn up, then you can come on. Not like last week where you cancelled at the last minute. Anyway, I'm over it now. But yeah, once again, thank you everyone who turned up. So lovely to see all these smart, intelligent, lovely people who come to join us every week. Really is a pleasure. I wouldn't do these if it weren't for the community. I would not do these if there were 1,000 people who tuned into these stream, but they were all miserable or rubbish. You guys are what makes this worth this. So once again, thank you. I'm so glad we all got to share in the joy of episode 5. I'm really looking forward to episode 6. I hope you enjoyed the episode whenever you're going to watch it tomorrow. I know it comes out awkward time for some people, but I really hope you enjoy episode 6. I'll be on Twitter tomorrow, so come give me your thoughts and let's talk about the episode tomorrow. And otherwise, I hope you have a lovely morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And as we always say, we do not say goodbye, we do not say farewell, we say namarie. So namarie, everyone. See you next week.
Mario.